Ready to start. Thank you so much. I would like to welcome you to the Public Safety Answering Points Real-Time Text Education Day. My name is Deborah Patkin. I'm an attorney advisor with the Disability Rights Office under the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau here at the FCC, and I will be your event moderator today. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of RTT, I'd like to take a quick moment and thank certain specific individuals. I want to thank Linda Vanderloop and Brian Unesco, members of our Emergency Communications Subcommittee of the Disability Advisory Committee. The DAC adopted a recommendation for the Commission to host this specific event for the purpose of providing education to PSAPs about the use of RTT for emergency communications. Ms. Vanderloop and Mr. Unesco took this idea from paper and made it into a reality. Next, I would like to thank Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. They have been an invaluable partner in making this event possible. In particular, John Evanoff, Nelly Fusnar, and Razul Safavian. I would also like to thank the interpreting and captioning team for ensuring effective communication. And also, finally, I would like to thank the Commission meeting room staff for their support in making this event possible. So just so you know, at the end of the day, there will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions during our Ask the Experts session. You can ask questions in two different ways. Here in the room, we have note cards on the table. You can find them at the back of the room, and you can hand them over to Michael Scott, who's an attorney with DRO, who's staying over here in the corner at the table with the laptops. If you are not here in the room and are online and you would like to email the question to livequestions@fcc.gov, we will have someone monitoring ready to respond. And so now to kick off the event, I would like to welcome Patrick Weber. He is the Chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and he will share some opening remarks.
Thank you, Deborah. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the FCC. As you all know, technology is advancing at an extraordinary pace. In fact, it seems that every morning we wake up to some new innovation that promises to change our lives. 10 years ago, flip phones were everywhere. Today, smartphones in our pockets are more powerful than some desktop processors. Today, we drive our own cars to get around. Tomorrow, we may all be passengers doing other things while cars drive us. Technology has changed the way we live, the way we learn, and the way we communicate. And as technology advances, so do our expectations for and dependence on these new innovations. With respect to emergency communications, technological advancements can lead to more lives saved, faster medical recoveries, reduced property damage, and overall a faster and more effective public safety response. We acknowledge that it can be daunting to navigate a new technology. Yet, as dedicated professionals committed to serving your communities, each of you have come here today to discuss a new and exciting solution for 911 access, real-time text, which is commonly referred to as RTT. Today, we're going to show you how this remarkable new communication method can make it easier for people to get immediate and effective assistance when they need to use text to summon help in emergency situations. In your line of work, you already know that each second counts in an emergency. Today, you will see the value of RTT and its compelling implications for emergency rescue and assistance. Because this technology never requires you to press send to get your message through, the conversational flow of RTT mirrors that of a voice call, allowing for the immediate delivery of valuable life-saving information. RTT also allows calling parties to transmit both text and voice simultaneously, a feature that is especially beneficial for people both with and without disabilities. More importantly, RTT allows people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, or who have a speech disability to have direct access to PSAPs on an equal footing as all others using a telephone. This is critical, considering that TTY, the technology upon which these populations previously relied to access emergency services, continues to significantly decline. And as you'll see today, wireless providers are starting to follow this trend, opting to support RTT rather than TTY. Nearly 80% of 911 calls now come from wireless phones. Given the prevalence of SMS texting over voice dialing, it might not be long before we also see RTT calls being made to PSAPs. I have tried out this technology myself, though not for emergency use, and I can tell you that I'm very impressed with its capabilities and ease of use. In addition to providing access for people with disabilities, as you know, in certain emergencies, it can be a matter of life and death to be able to silently use text to make contact with a first responder and convey vital information. Fortunately for PSAPs, adoption of RTT is both readily available and technically feasible. Today, you will learn about the different options PSAPs can use to become RTT ready. As you'll hear, providing support for RTT can further the spirit of NG 911's promise to enable everyone to access modern communications. As first responders, you understand how vital, effective emergency communications are. We very much appreciate your joining us today. And we hope that the new knowledge that you will acquire will encourage you to use advancing technologies as you continue your essential work of saving people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. And now let us introduce our next presenters, who will provide an overview of the regulatory policies. First, we have Karen Pelt-Strauss, the Deputy Bureau Chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. And we have David Firth, the Deputy Bureau Chief of Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau.
Pull up the PowerPoint. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. There we go. Great. Okay. It's great to be here. Thank you, especially for those of you who flew in or traveled from other locations. This is a really pivotal moment, I think, in emergency access. So we really want to thank you for taking the time to be here. What I'm going to do today is just give you a brief overview of our FCC rules on real-time text, and David is going to pick it up from there and talk to you about how they affect or how they're going to be implemented or could be implemented with respect to the provision or emergency services by PSAPs. So let me move to the next slide. Great. So in December of 2016, the FCC adopted rules that require real-time text where IP wireless providers don't want to provide compatibility with TTY. So just to back up a little bit, our rules already required that that wireless providers make their services and that manufacturers make their telephones compatible, usable with TTYs. But in an IP environment, this became more difficult. And so working with Gallaudet, working with various, with AT&T, the industry decided that it probably makes more sense to move into the 21st century and use a technology that's much more digital friendly, IP friendly. And so they actually came to the FCC. There was a petition filed by AT&T, and it asked whether, in lieu of making their services, their wireless systems in an IP environment compatible with TTYs, they could instead make them compatible with real-time text, which was a very, very welcome petition, especially because consumers, deaf consumers especially, have been urging the introduction of real-time text for about a decade before. So in 2016, in December 2016, this commission granted the petition and basically said, yes, in lieu of compatibility with TTYs, you may provide IP, provide real-time text to be compatible with your systems. Now, there's a nuance there. It's not actually required, and so not all providers have necessarily done it, although all of them are on the way to doing it. But if a provider would prefer to make its system compatible with TTYs, it may still do so. The requirements cover both, as I mentioned, service providers and manufacturers. And what the requirements also say is that if you do this, all your other obligations, your accessibility obligations, are waived for all, even non-IP facilities. So if you move ahead as a wireless provider and you provide real-time text, then you're relieved of your TTY compatibility obligations for all wireless services. So why the transition? Well, I alluded to it a little bit just now. TTYs, as many of you know, are old technology. It's a Baudot, B-A-U-D-O-T technology. It's slow, only 60 words per minute. It's called half duplex mode. You have to take turns. One side types, the other side responds. You can't type simultaneously. It has only a limited character set, basically the alphabet. So you can't even send a URL, for example. There's no @ symbol. It requires specialized equipment, as you can see on the slide. It requires a device, a TTY device. Generally, there is some software TTY, and actually now Apple, right around the time real-time text came out, Apple decided to integrate TTY capability into its phone. So you don't always need specialized equipment, but for the most part, that's what's been used in the past. And most importantly, it's not very reliable in an IP environment. So again, this gave incentive to the industry to take action to move everyone into the 21st century. So there are also many, many advantages of real-time text over TTY, even if TTY didn't have the IP reliability limitations. Communicate, and you're going to hear this theme over and over again today. So this is more or less an introduction. But communications convey automatically. You don't have to press send. So like TTYs, this is actually one thing in common with the TTY. As you are typing, you see the text coming across the recipient's phone. What does this mean in the emergency context? Again, you're going to hear a lot about this, but I'm just going to give you a preview of an example. Let's assume an intruder is coming into the house and somebody is typing and they text, let's say SMS, and they haven't yet pressed send. That PSAP first responder is going to know at least some of what's going on. Or let's say somebody is having a heart attack and only gets part of the message out. That responder is going to know some information because send doesn't have to be pressed to get that information out. It provides the real-time text also allows you to use regular telephone numbers, so that you don't need any special telephone numbers, which is also the same as TTY. But most important, amongst the very important points, is that real-time text has greater character options. So it uses a universal alphabet. You can use @signs. You can use multiple languages. You can use emojis, which is really helpful for people with cognitive disabilities. And also, you can use off-the-shelf equipment. No special equipment is necessary. Again, it's also more reliable than TTYs in an IP environment. So one of the things that the FCC looked at in adopting these rules, again, they are permissible rules and not requirements, but we felt that anyone moving forward with using this option had to have some baseline of minimum requirements to make sure that what they're providing provides at least the kind of telecommunications access that voice users have. So one of the most essential things is that when I make a phone call to someone else, I don't know what kind of equipment they're using. I don't know what service they're using. They could be using AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint. It doesn't matter to me whether they're using an Apple device, an Android device. I just make my call. That's interoperability. We wanted to make sure that everything is interoperable, and so what we did was we said you can use a standard called 4103, RFC 4103, as a safe harbor for ensuring real-time interoperability. What was really nice for us and for you is that this was actually already specified for use by NENA, NENA, for IP-based next-generation text communications where SIP technology is used. So many of you that already rely on NENA standards, it's already there. Something else that we said that's really critical is for the ability to send both text and voice simultaneously. And I think that you're going to be seeing demos later, is that right? I'm looking at Susie. Hopefully you'll be able to, yes, okay, good. Because hopefully you'll see that it's really sort of amazing for those of you who have not seen real-time text. You can text and you can speak at the same time, which is really pretty cool. And in an emergency, that could be very important. Our rules also encourage other calling features. We don't require them, but we think they're pretty important, such as alert indicators. I mean, somebody can't really receive a call unless they know that it's coming in. The same latency or error rates. Having the real-time text as a default functionality rather than requiring it as an add-on app, because it's our goal to actually make this technology ultimately the replacement for TTY everywhere, and also for people that aren't necessarily in need of text to start using it as another option, that just as people use SMS now that don't necessarily need text. Teleconferencing and other common calling features in a voice environment are also encouraged. The other obligation that we have is for, and you'll learn more about this as well, is for real-time text to be backward compatible with TTYs. So what does that mean? It means that TTY users need to be able to communicate with real-time text users and vice versa, so that the two modes of communication have to be compatible with each other, and you'll see that that has actually been achieved. The problem, however, is that when an RTT user is communicating with a TTY user, the communication is going to be limited to the capabilities of the TTY capabilities. So I mentioned before there's limitations in characters, there's limitations in speed, in turn taking, et cetera. So the calls can go through, but they're not going to be as effective as real-time text or real-time text. And one of the things that's really important if you start using real-time text is to convey this information through public outreach and education to consumers. It's also our responsibility to do so as well. So the last issue that I want to cover with you, and let me make sure the slide is on, is the difference between our jurisdiction and the Department of Justice's jurisdiction with respect to PSAPs. And I think there's often a lot of confusion about this, because under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, there's a requirement for state and local governments to make their services and systems accessible to people with disabilities. And this very clearly requires access, direct access, to 911 centers. And in fact, the legislative history is very clear, as is the Department of Justice's rules, that this access requirement cannot be met with relay services. It has to be direct access. So in the past, the Department of Justice interpreted this to require that PSAPs provide direct access via TTYs. And that's why those of you who work in PSAPs or first responders know that you have had TTYs since around 1991 or 1992 when it first became required. not a whole lot of people use TTYs anymore, so those TTYs, in large part, have probably remained dormant. But it is required that that you have this capability right now. However, the legislative history of the ADA made very clear that we should also be that technology, or TTY as a technology, was present in the 1990s, and that there could be future technological advances created to achieve compliance. And that's a really important point, because we are here. We are at future technological advances now. So a few years ago, in 2013, the Department of Justice issued they issued a letter. This was not a formal change of their rules, but it was a letter that they issued, and they sent it to us, and they explained the PSAPs still must, at a minimum, use TTYs, but that they could also use other equally effective telecommunications systems to communicate with individuals with hearing and speech disabilities. And the last part is a quote. They must use, for example, they can use SMS or real-time text, barring a showing of fundamental alteration or undue burden. So there's an opening, there's a crack there. Again, they have not revised their rules. They just haven't addressed these rules yet. They haven't ruled against it. But there's an opening there where they will allow PSAPs to use alternative methods of text, so long as you still have the capability of receiving TTY calls. So that's what the Department of Justice oversees, and that, again, is under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. We, on the other hand, regulate the providers, the telecommunications providers and the manufacturers, not the PSAPs. So we have no jurisdiction over the PSAPs. And I'm going to hand it over to David in a minute, and he is going to talk about the obligations that we have developed generally for providers, service providers. Just want to mention one last thing in terms of timing, what's required. Real-time text is already here. There's a fact sheet that will, at the bottom of page 1, goes through the deadlines, but just briefly, there was already a requirement, again, for those carriers who opted in to use real-time text in lieu of TTY, to support real-time text through an application or a plugin, or have real-time text capability natively available in at least one handset model by December 31st, 2017. AT&T has done that, T-Mobile, and Verizon has. And Sprint is beginning its transition to real-time text as it deploys voice over LTE and other IP-based calling technologies. Manufacturers of handsets that support wireless IP-based voice services, and again, that choose to support real-time text over TTY, must implement real-time text in all handsets manufactured after December 31st, 2018. So again, another very close deadline. Nationwide carriers, wireless carriers, in other words, Tier 1, opting to support real-time text must do so on all of their wireless devices by December 31st, 2019. So that's next year, again, a very soon deadline. And then Tier 2 and Tier 3, which are typically local and regional wireless carriers, have an obligation to support real-time text in at least one handset model by June 30th, 2020, and then all wireless devices by June 30th, 2021. So the phase-in is over the next few years. So again, as I've done in the past, I want to thank tremendously the wireless carriers that are here. I think most of you are here, the Tier 1 carriers, and it's been remarkable the speed with which you've worked and how you've really enabled this this wish to come true for the deaf and hard of hearing community and people that are speech disabled and people that are deaf-blind. Again, thank you all. I hope you have a very productive day, and I will be around to answer questions. And now I hand it over to David.
Well, thank you, Karen. And I'm delighted to be here today on behalf of the Public Safety Bureau. I don't have slides, so you're just going to have to bear with me. What I'd like to do is walk you very briefly through the two sets of rules that apply to providers and that also affect the PSAP when we talk about alternatives to voice-only communication with 911. And so I'm going to talk about our text to 911 rules and then a little bit more elaboration on the real-time text rules that Karen has described and how they then shape the issues that PSAPs, today's PSAPs, face in a rapidly changing technological environment. So just to go back in time a little bit, the Commission text to 911 rules, we launched a proceeding, actually went back to 2011 is when we launched our initial notice on text to 911. Now at that time, our legacy TTY rules were in place for 911, and the text to 911 proceeding did not change those rules. In 2011, the Commission adopted a notice proposed rulemaking, and then in 2012, the major carriers, along with APCO and NENA, entered into a voluntary commitment that they would, the carriers would support text to 911, would make it available to all PSAPs if PSAPs chose to accept text to 911. And let me make clear at the outset, when I'm talking about text to 911 in this context, what I'm talking about is text messaging, which is quite different from real-time text because text messaging is text only, whereas real-time text, as you've heard and you will see demonstrated, is text plus voice. So one of the important things we have to keep in mind is that difference. In 2014, the Commission adopted its text to 911 rules. And that was a requirement that was applied to all wireless carriers and interconnected text providers. So this set of rules, like the RTT rules, they only apply to providers. They do not apply to PSAPs. But they define both the carrier's obligations to support alternative communications and also certain options that they have and that PSAPs have for how they want to take those alternatives. So in the text to 911 rules, there are a couple of things to remember. Perhaps the most critical is that our text to 911 rules are technologically neutral. They do not specify any particular technology for delivering text to the PSAPs. The Commission anticipated that when the rules were adopted, the carriers would primarily use SMS-based texting as the text medium for delivering text messages to PSAPs, and that has proven to be the case. But the rules do not limit carriers to providing text via SMS. Carriers may migrate from SMS to some other method. They may support more than one method, and in this context, they can support SMS and RTT. There's no legal prohibition to doing that, and the text to 911 rules do not need to be changed if carriers choose to go down that evolutionary path. A couple of other things that are important to where PSAPs are today in terms of actually accepting text to 911. When the Commission adopted the rules in 2014, those were rules that mandated that carriers support text to 911, but we did not mandate that PSAPs accept text to 911. That's strictly at the option of the PSAP, the state, or the local 911 authority. What we did say was that if a PSAP wanted to accept text to 911, they would need to make a request to the carriers. They could do that by listing themselves in our text to 911 registry, and they would have to specify the method by which they want to receive text to 911. And the three methods are translation to TTY, so they could use, PSAPs can use their TTYs to accept text messages, a web-based solution that would typically be installed on the call handling equipment in the PSAP, or a direct native IP connection, so that text could be initiated in IP and could be received in IP. And this is the framework and the architecture that we are moving towards, particularly as part of the next generation 911 transition. So the hope, the expectation is that when we get to next generation 911, which will support all IP modes, then both text messaging and RTT can be handled over direct IP. The text to 911 rules also have a couple of important limitations that are worth noting. One is that the Commission did not require for text messaging to 911 that carriers provide location information as they are required to do for voice calls and indeed as they are required to do for TTY calls. Also, the rules do not require support for text while roaming. The Commission has a further notice out on this and on the location issue, but those issues are still pending. And there were also some exceptions in the text to 911 rules to clarify that it would not apply, for example, to technologies such as in-flight text messaging or mobile satellite, to IP relay, or to Wi-Fi only originated texts. So texting that is carried over a carrier network is subject to the text to 911 rules, but these other alternatives are not. Where we are right now is that as of August, according to our Text to 911 registry, which is publicly available on the Commission's website, we have over 1,700 PSAPs listed as text capable. That's about a quarter of all the PSAPs in the United States. That covers about a third of the U.S. population, and that's about double the number of PSAPs that were registered a year ago. And we actually think that the true number of PSAPs that are text capable is higher because they are not required to register with us. And we know that some PSAPs have implemented text to 911 capability without registering. We also expect these numbers to increase significantly over the course of the next few months and the next year. For example, in my home state of Maryland, currently there's only one county, which is Frederick County, which was one of the first to develop text to 911 capability. But there is a state law that is going to require statewide implementation. Other jurisdictions in the National Capital Region, including the District of Columbia, are text capable. So we're seeing a lot of movement there. Now let's fast forward to the adoption of the RTT order that Karen described in 2016, and talk then a little bit about how that relates to what the Commission had already done with respect to text to 911. So as Karen indicated, in the RTT report and order, the Commission gave wireless carriers the option of supporting RTT in lieu of TTY. The Commission stated that if a carrier was going to support RTT, it would have to support the capability of RTT to 911 and comply with applicable 911 rules. And the applicable rules for RTT 911 are the same rules that apply to TTY. Basically, for purposes of FCC 911 regulations, TTY and RTT are to be treated as voice calls. RTT also must be backward compatible with TTY, as Karen indicated, to support communication with PSAPs that are not capable of RTT to RTT communications, and therefore still rely on TTY. And if a PSAP wants to take RTT traffic directly, rather than through TTY, the order provides that it can request that the carriers provide RTT directly, and that triggers a 6-month implementation period, which is similar to the process that we have for text to 911. So where we are now is that the text to 911 rules and the RTT rules exist side by side. The text to 911 rules didn't change the TTY rules that were in place at the time, and the RTT rules didn't change the text to 911 rules. So how does this look from the perspective of the PSAP? Well, that depends on where the PSAP is on the continuum between legacy and next generation 911. Most PSAPs still today are what we call legacy PSAPs, which means they are using traditional telephone-based technology, TDM technology, for the receipt primarily of voice calls. And all of those PSAPs have TTYs. But let's start with that pure legacy PSAP. So it's a PSAP that, let's assume, is not elected to take text to 911 and hasn't migrated beyond legacy technology generally. And that's still the numerical majority of PSAPs in the country. As I said, all of those PSAPs have TTY, and typically they will receive very few or no TTY calls. Because TTY usage has declined so precipitously, but they still must be capable of receiving TTY. So one of the things that we will be talking about more in this workshop is what's likely to change on the consumer side as the carrier side as carriers move away from TTY and start making RTT available to their subscribers. Well, one of the consequences of that is that we could see more RTT 911 traffic going to those TTYs that by and large haven't been used in the PSAP. So that's something that PSAPs need to be prepared for. And it's also a reason then for PSAPs to think about, the ones that have not yet started down this path, to think about technological upgrades and moving to next generation 911. Because everybody recognizes the limitations of TTY technology. Karen talked about it. It's old technology, and it's rapidly being supplanted by technologies that can provide much more versatility, accessibility for both consumers and for PSAPs. So that's an issue that will face legacy PSAPs. Then we also have to look at this from the perspective of PSAPs that have started down that technology upgrade path, and in particular, those that have already elected to become text to 911 capable, and therefore they are receiving SMS texts. And then the question for them is, well, how does RTT fit into this? And again, it's going to depend on where they are on that technological continuum from legacy to next generation. And there are two key points to remember from a PSAP perspective in thinking about the choices. The first is SMS and RTT are different. One is text only, and the other is text plus voice and has all of the capabilities that Karen talked about and that we'll be exploring further today. The second is that from the consumer perspective, consumers will have the opportunity, the option to use either SMS or RTT on many devices with most carriers. We don't know which they're going to use. They will have choices, and a lot of it will depend on where consumers feel, what mode of communication they consider to be most familiar, most comfortable for purposes of making an emergency communication. So what that means is that PSAPs need to be prepared and planning for both text messaging, SMS-based, and perhaps future iterations such as MMS, but also for RTT. And they need to be planning both from a technology point of view and an operational point of view. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the way I look at it, PSAPs have a number of options in this situation in terms of how they would handle both SMS and RTT traffic. One option is to use their existing TTY to do that. They all have TTYs, but as we know and we'll discuss further, TTYs have limitations, and therefore I think that from a technology perspective, in terms of what's possible, that's really the least preferred option. The best option would be to handle both SMS and RTT over IP, to upgrade to next generation 911, to have integrated IP in the entire call chain and in your call handling system. And that will give PSAPs much more flexibility at the receiving end to handle both SMS and RTT in an integrated manner. And then there are PSAPs that are using intermediate solutions. For example, if a PSAP is using a web browser solution for SMS, as many are, that solution won't support RTT without modification or upgrade, because RTT comes in over the voice network, not over the SMS network, and it includes a voice component. And that means that rather than coming in as a text message initially, it could manifest itself as a silent voice call. So the workshop is going to explore all of these options. I'm looking forward to the demonstrations and to our panel of experts from the industry that are going to talk about some of those solutions. And the other important message for PSAPs, I think, is to learn from the opportunity that is provided by other PSAPs, to test RTT solutions, to share results with one another, and for early adopters to help those who are making that transition later. This is something that's worked very well in the text to 911 world, and I am confident it's going to benefit real-time text as well. So with that, I'm going to get off the podium, and we will move on, I think, to our next part of the session. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Pelt-Strauss and Mr. Firth, for that overview of our regulatory policies on emergency communications. I want to take a moment to remind you that we have copies of the RTT fact sheet on the table in the back of the room. There is also an electronic copy available online. It's a basic reference guide for you to use on RTT and emergency communications. And now we have some demonstrations, which include several people. Christian Vogler, Director of the Technology Access Program at Gallaudet University, will discuss general RTT mechanics. Then we have Ian Dillner, Associate General Counsel of the Federal Regulatory Affairs at Verizon. And we have Linda Vanderloop, Assistant Vice President of External Affairs at AT&T. And they will be demonstrating wireless RTT calls. And finally, we will have Jeff Knighton, President of Hamilton Innovations, who will demonstrate wireline RTT calls. Welcome to you all.
Okay. Hello, I am Christian Vogler. I'm from the Technology Access Program at Gallaudet University. My group has partnered with a number of different universities that have been working on RTT for over 20 years at this point. So I'm just going to get into a really brief explanation of real-time text to help you get sort of a sense of what it looks like and how it could be beneficial for improving emergency access and access through a couple different movies that I'm going to show you. RTT itself basically means that as I am typing on my end of the chat, each character I type is sent as it is typed. So the person on the other end of that call is seeing those characters come in real time, and they can also type back to me simultaneously. So we don't have to have the artificial constraints of turn taking that you're familiar with in a TTY. It's much more interactive, natural, simultaneous interaction, and reduces overall conversation time, reduces misunderstandings. So I'm going to show you a total of 5 video clips here in sequence. It's going to give 5 different use cases for real-time text technology, where real-time text is going to make a difference in that communication event. And I'm going to quickly sum them up for you, 1 through 5, and then we'll show you the videos. The first clip you're going to see is a situation where you've got a tornado warning, and you've got a deaf person trying to call their neighbor to make sure that their child is safe. Real-time text reducing the length of time that that conversation takes and getting them to the point. Second is real-time text and voice simultaneously for a hard-of-hearing person on a phone call who is able to identify that there's some information they can't really discern audibly, and they're able to get real-time text input in order to clarify that misunderstanding and really avert a misunderstanding. Video 3 is going to show you a deaf-blind person who's using American Sign Language on their end, a sighted person on the other end who is visually seeing the sign language, but is replying to the deaf-blind person through real-time text that goes through a refreshable braille display, improving access for deaf-blind people using telecommunications. Fourth video is going to give you an example of a two-way conversation that starts to drift off with misunderstandings, that people aren't on the same page, and sometimes that turn-taking, which we're traditionally used to, can exacerbate that. Real-time text is going to help bring these two people a little bit closer to a shared understanding before they get too far out in left field. And the last clip, number 5, is going to show you what an RTT call looks like between 2 of these different carriers, AT&T and Verizon. So now if we could roll tape.
who is hard of hearing.
Hi, Ms. Smith. We changed your appointment to this afternoon.
Okay, see you in 20 minutes.
Not until this afternoon, Ms. Smith.
Woman texts on cell phone. The appointment is this afternoon.
Yes, see you at the office soon.
Ms. Smith, please look at your phone.
Oh, I see. This afternoon. I thought it was this morning.
No, we moved it to 3 o'clock.
Woman texts on cell phone. 3 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. I recognize that some of those videos froze and were a little blurry, but the videos are also available on our website, so hopefully we'll be able to distribute the link to attendees here and you can watch it again without those kinds of disturbances. So one last point that I wanted to make before I turn it over to my carrier colleagues, AT&T and Verizon, I also want to share that iOS 12's recent upgrade, AT&T also has RTT built into their iPhones as well. So there's a native implementation on iPhone in all those carriers now. Thank you.
So thank you. I'm Linda Vandeloop from AT&T and Ian Dildner from Verizon. And so we wanted to show you an actual call. And what we're going to try and do is do both, because I have the app for AT&T and also the native to the device with iOS 12. So we're going to try and switch back and forth. If it doesn't work, it's definitely operator error, not the technology. We are, again, going to demo actual voice calls, and Well, we can't do, we can't do demo everything. We're going to give you an idea of what a call looks like and how it works. Again, it has all the characters of the actual device, so it's not limited like the TTY. There's foreign language keyboards that can be accessed. You can do symbols, we can do emojis. We can do voice to text and also simultaneous voice and text. Also wanted to mention that because it's a voice call, some concern has been raised about, is this going to cost me more? And it is not. AT&T has added, traditionally our accessibility plans had no voice. For the limited number of voice calls that people would make, it was 40 cents a minute. We recognized that, and we added unlimited voice calls to all of the plans, so it won't cost any more, and I know others have done something similar. So, Ian, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Thank you, Linda. Again, this is Ian Dillner at Verizon. I think that pretty much summarized it. I think some of our earlier speakers noted the differences between other text-based communications and RTT. RTT is a phone call. So we're going to place a phone call, and then there will be text and voice both present on that phone call. And so we'll demonstrate a few of the features so that you get a sense, like Linda said, of the interface that's available. Thanks. So my screen is off to my left. You are right, you can see, and I've brought up, here's the home screen, my phone app. I can go to recent calls and dial a phone call just like any other, Linda Vanderloop. I'm going to call her mobile, make sure I get the right one. Whoops. I went to message, sorry. I have it in large font so that you all can see it, but it makes it harder for me to see the entire screen. Here we are. Okay, I'm placing a phone call to her right now. And so this is my iPhone placing the call to Linda. And you can see that there's an RTT button that's present. Linda, are you receiving a telephone call from me yet? Okay. And I pressed the RTT button, and Linda has said hello. Hello, Linda. It is good to be at FCC.
Thank you.
Okay.
Trying to voice to text.
Okay.
The delay is not
Okay.
working.
And we can also demonstrate simultaneous typing. I can't spell. This doesn't help with that, although it does have suggestions, just like other text messaging does, so that you can do that. So, and you can see that I'm able to delete characters. I can delete this entire message, and it will delete on my screen as well as on Linda's screen. It was also discussed in some of the earlier presentations that there is simultaneous voice and text. You may notice on my interface in the upper right, there's a microphone icon. I can press that and talk into the voice, and you might not be able to hear it in the audience, but Linda can probably hear me through her handset. I'm going to deactivate that now only because I want to avoid interference problems because our phones are kind of close. Again, to remind you that this is a phone call based, and so one can hang up the phone by going back and hitting the red dot just like a normal phone call, or return to the RTT keyboard. I click the globe there's a globe icon at the bottom, and I can choose different languages that I've loaded into my keyboard. So if I, whoops. If I want, I have the Spanish keyboard up right now, and so I can hit different keys. I can change the keyboard to, I think this is Korean, and, you know, type Korean symbols that I cannot recognize. Just to let you know some of the features that are available in the device.
So switch to the app?
Yes, I'm going to hang up the phone. I'm going to hang up the phone call right now. Okay, and let's give Linda one moment while she switches to the AT&T downloadable application that is available, I think, on any AT&T smartphone, Android or iOS. Is that right, Linda? Yes, she confirms. And so it has a different user interface, but is very similar to the interface that you were just experiencing. Just to know that there are different interfaces. The Apple interface is available I think on Verizon, and I think on AT&T on the Apple 6 and 6S and above, so 6, 7, 8, and 10. And at Verizon, we have 3 Android models that have real-time text built into them as well.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. You want to call me? Okay.
Oh. Well, you call me, I guess, and it says I'm not connected to RTT. You may have to reboot it.
Okay. Should I try to call you right now?
Let's see, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to try to call Linda. So I am not quite sure what to type, but I'm just typing that this is working well on both the AT&T interface that you can see on the screen next to Linda. It just has a slightly different user interface, but many of the same features and functions, and that's available for AT&T customers. For Verizon customers, again, the capabilities are built in natively into the devices, the Apple devices, and right now 3 Android devices and a growing number. So if you have any other questions during the course of the meeting, please feel free to contact Linda and I, but we thought it would be helpful, similar to Christian's demonstrations, to show you what we're talking about in real time and that it's working in real time. Thank you.
We'll see if this comes up. Helps if you press the power button to turn the TV on. Hi, I am Jeff Knighton. I am president of Hamilton Innovations, which is one of a number of business units from Hamilton Telecommunications. I'm joined here today by Ryan Weintier, who is with Hamilton NG 911. And the demonstration that I'm going to show to you today is surrounding the use of real-time text on a wireline VoIP system. We're in a wireline VoIP environment, which is different from what you just saw, which is wireless. Now, the voice over IP technology that we have available here supports real-time text in a similar way. Now, at Hamilton, we have Hamilton Relay, which is a business unit that many of you are familiar with. And Hamilton Relay has been a telecommunication relay service provider for over 25 years. And in many states, you can reach Hamilton Relay simply by dialing 711. And we offer the traditional text relay services, including voice carryover, hearing carryover, speech-to-speech services. Now, we have been strong supporters of real-time text for many, many years. And given our unique organizational structure, we happen to have a relay provider, a voice over IP telecommunication company, and also an NG 911 ESI services, ESInet service provider, all under one family. And so we've been able to, as we learn about real-time text, we've been able to explore how it will change the nature of telecommunication relay services and how it can also be applied into a wireline environment. And so what you are seeing right here is a wireline VoIP telephone that natively supports voice and real-time text. And the screen is being reproduced on this larger screen. I don't know if we can shine this camera back here and you can see a picture of the actual phone device, which is sitting here on the table, almost. There it is. All right, so what you are seeing is a phone device that has a keypad. There is also a companion keyboard that we will use. And what I'm going to be demonstrating is a real-time text call to 711. So that you can see what the experience will be. Ryan is going to answer a voice call. I'm going to play the role of somebody who is a text-reliant person dialing 711 using real-time text, and so we can see that experience. Now I'm going to send Ryan into the back of the room, into the hallway, so that this is a little bit more authentic. So what you're seeing is the relay operator has received my request. So he typed hello. So you can see the text comes from the relay operator to me, and I'm able to type as relay operator. Given my history with TTY communications, it's very natural for me to type a GA at the end of the communication, although we've learned that as people start to use this and we're demonstrating it, the experience comes across such that they don't feel like they need to use those etiquette conventions of GA and a Q. So I'm going to showcase, still continuing the communication a little bit. there's the GA again, but you can see that when the communications assistant is typing characters to me, I'm able to type characters to them, and that the communication is able to proceed in a more natural way. Although I'll be the first to admit that having this phone call right here feels very unnatural to me. But it still demonstrates the point that we have an ability to have a communication with a relay operator. Now, standing up here, I can hear the communication, the voice communication from Ryan come through my phone device. And if I have this, right now I have my microphone muted on the device, and if I were to unmute the microphone, he would be able to hear me as well. So the various modes of relay, such as hearing carryover and voice carryover, come very naturally in a real-time text environment because the voice channel is completely separated from the text channel. Just on this particular phone, I can also change some of the visual characteristics on this. And I can change font sizes and other things. Now, this telephone is a Hamilton-developed telephone. It's using Hamilton's VoIP service, and this particular call was made to Hamilton Relay. We are in the process at Hamilton of exploring doing trials of real-time text, of wireline real-time text, in conjunction with a number of states, so that we can gain experience in understanding the impact of real-time text. We're also working with a number of PSAPs to gain experience on real-time text. And that's the end of my demonstration.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for such wonderful demonstrations to provide us with such a clear idea of what's happening with real-time text. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. We're a tiny bit ahead of schedule, so we're going to ask everyone to be back at 1:55. Great. Thank you. Are we ready to start? If everyone could please come back and take their seats. We are ready to get the second part of our day started. Are we ready?
One more.
Okay, we're waiting just a minute.
Yeah. No, you're not late. We said 2 o'clock, so.
All right, now that everyone is back, I want to welcome everyone back to get started. This event is being webcast, and it will be archived on our website. So you can inform all of your colleagues that all of the things that we've seen today, including the video, the demonstration, and the PowerPoint materials, will be archived on our event page for future viewing. And now we have the PSAP model infrastructure panel. Our moderators are Nellie Fusner, an attorney with the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. And we also have Rasul Safavian. He is a senior engineer, also with the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the PSAP Model Infrastructure for RTT Adoption panel portion of the RTT Education Day. As the announcer announced, I'm Rasul Safavian, a senior engineer with the Public Safety Homeland Security Bureau of the FCC, and I will be co-moderating this panel along with my colleague Nellie Fusner, who is an attorney advisor and also with the Public Safety Homeland Security Bureau of the FCC. Before we get started, Nellie, would you please go over the format and logistics of the panel?
Thank you, Rasul. First off, we would like to thank you all for attending RTT Day. This panel will focus on real-time text adoption and public safety answering points, or PSAPs, across the country. We will have a presentation followed by a discussion with our panelists, leaving time at the end for questions from the audience and online attendees. If you have a question during the panel, please email them to livequestions@fcc.gov or write them legibly on one of the index cards that are located at the back of the room, and give the card to Lisa at the table behind me. If you would like a handheld microphone for questions, a staff member will make one available. We encourage audience members in the room as well as online viewers to submit questions online. Depending on time constraints, we will try to get to all of the questions from our audience. After this panel, there will also be an Ask the Experts panel where the audience can ask questions from members of both panels. We encourage you to stick around for that portion of the program. Additionally, for the benefit of our online audience, if you happen to experience delays with the FCC live stream, please refresh your browser or try Google Chrome. The webcast will be made available on the FCC's website. You can follow this event on Twitter, and you can comment by using the hashtag FCCLive. Finally, I would like to thank the CMR staff, Jeff Riordan, Steve Balderson, our sign language interpreters and captioning team, and all the other people who made this event possible today.
Thank you, Nellie. We are honored and excited to have some of the experts, really gurus in the field, with us today. I will let them briefly introduce themselves and their organizations. And let's start with the left of Nellie. Mark, with you, please.
Mark Fletcher, I'm the Chief Architect for Public Safety Solutions at Avaya.
Jeff Knighton, I'm the President of Hamilton Innovations, representing Hamilton's NG911 business unit.
Drew Morin, I'm the Director of Federal Cyber Technology Engineering and Programs at T-Mobile.
Richard Muscat, I'm Director of Regulatory for the Bear Metro 911 Network and the Texas 911 Alliance.
John Snap, the VP of Technology for West Safety Services.
Great. Okay, without any further ado, let's get started with the presentations, please. So just a little bit about the presentations. There's going to be one long presentation, which is, we have contribution from every panelist in that presentation. So they'll be speaking to the different portion of the presentation, and after that, we'll be taking question and answers, or from the, we'll be giving questions to the panelists, and after that, we'll be taking question and answer from the audience.
So beginning this presentation, we obviously did the introductions. We were going to talk about briefly what is real-time text. We were going to talk a little bit about the implementation of RTT, some of the use case scenarios you're going to see at the public safety answering point, and then a little bit more detail about the architecture. So I think from the standpoint of what is real-time text, David Firth gave a great example of description of that already. Suffice to say, the biggest difference between what we've seen with TTY, real-time text, and text to messaging, or text, real-time text TTY, and SMS 911, is real-time text is a phone call, but it's an IP-based phone call. So because it's an internet protocol-based phone call, it has some unique characteristics. I'm sitting here pausing, hoping the slides will come up, but I guess we're just going to have to go ahead and keep going.
I
Next
think
slide.
the control is in front of you. You can
Oh, okay.
move them back and forth as you wish.
Let's try this. Hey, now we're talking.
Okay, we have.
Oh, we've done the introductions.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and go to this slide after that. Okay. So why is the real-time text important? There's a couple different things. From a consumer perspective, it really is a little bit of a different way to engage the end user as we see people become more familiar with text messaging and with the way of using your mobile device to type in information directly on to these smartphone pads as opposed to an individual specialized keyboard. So it tries to make it more accessible, more readily available, and that's kind of a consumer benefit to it. From a public safety answering point perspective, we're really going to enhance what the public safety answering point experience will be, because you're going to be able to have voice in line at the same time as the text coming in. If you think about TTY, you get a tone that comes in that gets translated into this TTY message stream. You don't get to actually be talking to the person and receiving the messaging at the same time. You get that with real-time text. From a technology perspective, we're talking about improving in the challenges we have as the networks have advanced and we've gone more digital. Trying to take TTY, an analog signal, translating it to digital, transmitting it, and then translating it from digital back to analog tones for TTY, you lose some of the information, and it creates errors in the context. So with real-time text, it's going to be a little bit more pure in the at the end time, where it's going to really go digital, digital, digital. We do have a transitional stage we're going to be going through right now, and we'll talk about that as we go through the different architectural components of it. Did you want to add anything?
No,
Okay.
you're doing great.
Okay, but wait, there's more. So I've heard we've had some discussion already about SMS 911. What we wanted to try and do is with this is to paint a little bit of a difference of what each one is and what it isn't, and why that is going to influence how this is going to look at the PSAP as you go forward. So with TTY, we're all familiar with that. You're basically making a phone call and using a very old modem, a vintage, what was it, 60s technology type modem, to deliver tones. And the tones are mapped into a single 128 character set. Okay? So it's a very simple, very capable system. But as the network has progressed in technology, as noted, the TTY technology has had to stay the same, the backward compatibility. TTY does have a circuit that's connected from point to point. So it does provide that end-to-end connectivity. And that's beneficial. It's a real-time communications method. When you look at short message service, or SMS, by default, SMS is not real-time. It is a store and forward technology, okay? David talked about 3 different methods of delivery, but ultimately the first part is where the device talks to the network. And in the original instantiation of it, short message service was sent to a short message service center, and it would basically take the message, hold on to it, and ensure it got delivered to the endpoint, in this case, the PSAP. And the 911 phone number was the equivalent of what we would call a short code. It said, if you see this text message to this number, always send it this direction for emergency services. Now, it's evolved, and it's changed, and it's growing, and it's enhancing, and there's some new rulemaking procedures being looked at as how it will change. But fundamentally, short message service is not really an end-to-end connection. It is a store and forward type of mechanism. Okay? Real-time text gets the best of both worlds. It goes back to the TTY to have an end-to-end connection, which means you really do have that real-time communication component. It has the text that comes in, which means it's very easy to communicate in the new and modern messaging technologies that are out there. And it also can leverage location technology for mobility and other types of capabilities to be sent along with this communication, including voice along with it, which TTY did not have. So that hopefully gives you a feel for the differences between TTY, which is an end-to-end, but it translates everything to a single character-based stream. SMS to RTT, which is text messaging store and forward based, and real-time text, which is guarantees that delivery happens, but also does it in real time with voice in parallel. Anything else? Nope?
No.
Okay. I turn to Jeff because Jeff and I worked together on a panel at APCO and ANINA, and and this context was part of that panel discussion, as well as others. And I wanted to, keep trying to make sure that, okay, is there anything else you wanted to add in on?
You were accurate.
Okay, I just need some validation here. Kidding. So when T-Mobile launched, we launched December 31st native direct, as did I think Verizon with the iPhone platform. We actually launched with two different devices. T-Mobile worked closely with two different manufacturers. Oh, we lost a slide. There it is. We worked with LG and with Samsung. And both of these are what are called native. They're built into the platform. They're not an application that's downloadable that sits on top. They are part of the existing platform that's delivered. We felt that provided a lot of benefits in terms of execution, and we'll talk a little bit later on about the differences you see between a native and an application. Both get the message where it needs to do it. It needs to go. It needs to get delivered to the PSAP. But they both do it a little bit differently, and that difference is something that you need to be aware of in public safety. So that you understand what to expect and what you're going to see. So when we went through the process of working with these two handset manufacturers, we actually provided them with a specification to meet, but we gave them a little bit of flexibility. And as a result of that flexibility, you have two slightly different implementations, okay? One of the implementations, the LG, leveraged the GA and the SK keys. So they kind of modeled their keyboard more like a TTY terminal, their thought process being that it would be more familiar, okay? Samsung, they took more of a look-forward approach. They modeled theirs more similar to their existing text messaging interface. There is no SK or GA key. It does the bubbling like you would see in one of the text messagings, and if you hit enter, it would send. So essentially, you had two slightly different implementations. And so this one I'm showing right here, right now, is the Samsung. And if I step forward, you'll see the LG. You will see that both of them took advantage of what are common user interface advantages of today's technology, the idea of bubbles to create that kind of context, and also our favorite, the ability to have extended character case, including emojis. So you can do a lot of different things to communicate within these. And these are some of the things we're seeing common in the Apple implementation you saw demoed earlier, as well as in the AT&T application. T-Mobile leveraged this experience with these two launches to work with our manufacturers. We have now launched over 20 handsets with RTT native, and we have another dozen in the pipeline. So if we'd been up here with AT&T and Verizon, all the permutations, we'd still be doing demonstrations right now. So we've been very successful, and we really are trying to push the envelope to get these devices out into the community and give you choice, which is what you should get. So the last slide I'm going to talk about, and then use it as a transition, is we talked earlier, I think David Firth mentioned about the different delivery mechanisms of RTT into the public safety answering point. This is a little bit of a visual for it, for you to kind of take what David said and kind of plant in your minds a visual to go with it. And you'll see from left to right, on the left-hand side is what we have today, which is essentially the legacy PSAP. And in this case, where you're going through a legacy network to deliver RTT to a legacy PSAP. You have that blue box up there that says gateway. That essentially is doing what we're doing today, which is translating from real-time text to TTY. And it happens as close to the PSAP network as you can get, because of course, once again, since it is a TTY analog at that point, you do have interference and data errors that can happen in that last leg. So you always want to do TTY translation as close to the PSAP as possible. The middle is a legacy PSAP that is connected to an emergency services internet, ESINet, emergency services IP network. In this case, once again, you're still trying to do the translation prior to getting into the legacy PSAP, but you're doing it outside the ESINet. So the ESINet delivers to the legacy gateway, and it gateways into the legacy PSAP.
Okay, so that's kind of the transitional phase, if you will. The final, all the way on the right-hand side, I can always get turned around here. On the right-hand side is a true next-generation network. And here you're able to deliver the SIP connection end-to-end between the device and the PSAP, and then you're able to deliver the real-time text over top of that connection, and it gets delivered in the PSAP where their call handling solution, which is next-gen based, will be able to display it and make it most flexible for the PSAP operator. Okay? So that's a bit of the background and some of the launching that's occurred.
As Drew mentioned, today RTT is converted to TTY for purposes of 911 calls. This call is from an actual test call with T-Mobile with the Tarrant County 911 district, and it provides, in this example, some of the canned messages that you would see in response to a TTY 911 call. You'll see the Q, you'll see the GA, because that's how the system is currently set up today. We reached out early on to Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint to try and test before the FCC deadline, and did do that. And even though it was going to be converted to TTY, we just wanted to make sure that we weren't missing something. And so this is an actual test call, and that's how it came in. And so that's what a caller would see, which is basically similar to what we saw earlier, except for the Q and the GA in some of the ones that were RTT to RTT, but even in some of those, there was an option if somebody wanted to use the GA, they could. At least on my iOS 12, there was an option for that. The following slide is the opposite side, what the call taker will see today, which again, in this interface for TTY, you would see, the text and the canned messages, and you respond accordingly. And some of the SMS interfaces look essentially the same. You just don't have the Q and the GA showing up as part of that. So this really shouldn't be, for a PSAP that has SMS to 911, RTT shouldn't really be a big change. And for areas that don't have text to 911, that just have TTY, even though there may not be many calls, those TTYs are tested on a regular basis. So from the text side, this should not be really a change for the PSAP. It's on the delivery side where there could be some slight changes or slight things to be aware of, and I'll go into that in the following slides. Again, this is an example from testing with the Tarrant County 911 district, and you notice the one on the right came in as a normal wireless call with a WPH2 class of service with looking at the XY coordinates for location. The call on the other side came in as what some people would call a VoIP call, in this case with a VBML class of service, which is used in some areas. In other areas, it might just be a VoIP class of service. And I'm going to go into that difference in a little more detail and just want to provide a little background. But those are the two basic differences, and now in the next slides, we'll go into those in more detail. This next slide has nothing to do with RTT, but it really does. And this, about a few years ago, Nina started to recognize that this handset can make calls and communicate in many different ways. It can send an SMS text message, it can send a voice call, it can send RTT, and it could also do something that's called Wi-Fi calling. And Wi-Fi calling in the 911 context, when I usually bring it up, no one really is sure what I'm talking about, and there's good reason for that. In a regular context, for example, when I'm at my home, probably 80% of my calls go out as Wi-Fi calling. I have my phone always set to Wi-Fi calling. I don't use public Wi-Fi, but when I'm at home, if I make a call to the drugstore, it went out as a Wi-Fi calling 911 call and not as a CMRS call. So my cable modem broadband provider, which is Spectrum, Time Warner Cable, it goes out that way. But if I make a 911 call, this handset is programmed to prefer the CMRS network. So it's next to impossible, although you're putting it in airplane mode and trying to create some scenarios where the handset won't do that. But there could be some cases where maybe there isn't a CMRS network and you only had Wi-Fi calling. And in that case, this is what those screens would look like. The one on the left being the normal CMRS call that we received today, and the one on the right being the VoIP Wi-Fi calling call. And you'll notice that it also has the same VMBL class of service. In Texas is one of the areas that it's enabled that class of service. Other areas it might show up as VoIP. So this, and it also says AT&T Wi-Fi calling, which is another way in addition to the class of service to distinguish that call. And again, this has nothing to do with RTT, except that when we go back to the other slides or the next slides, you'll see that kind of looks the same as the difference between the AT&T app for RTT versus the wireless T-Mobile or iOS 12 for AT&T 911 call. So it wasn't so much an RTT difference, but a difference in the nature of how the call went out through the network, potentially. But those differences can be accommodated for, and once we can explain to the PSAP why they're different. Okay, going on to the next slide. This slide was made from the AT&T RTT app. And again, it looks a little bit more like a VoIP call in that it has the customer's name, it has their address, the 24618 Arrow Canyon Road, and it came in with XY coordinates. Now, in the case of VoIP, we've really trained telecommunicators historically to pay attention to the civic address. You know, XY coordinates, at least in our areas of Texas, XY coordinates show up on a VoIP call, but no one ever pays attention to them, or they haven't historically in the past because they were trained and things were set up to pay attention to the civic address, registered location, you know, because it's VoIP. Now, when we were doing some of our our Wi-Fi calling testing, or RTT, I'm actually a little confused which one of the two, but again, they work the same. We noticed that in few of the scenarios that we set up, we got just XY coordinates. And they were actually fairly good XY coordinates. And so we actually changed our mapping, and you'll see if you look carefully at this slide, you'll see that the map is pointing to a location that's not exactly the registered address. And that was because we set our mapping up to, in this particular, for that class of service, to pay attention to the XY coordinates. Now, if we had set it up to pay attention to the civic address, which would be the standard case in most VoIP calls, it would have mapped exactly. And which one of those two is really the appropriate way, I think that probably deserves more investigation on how often you would get XY coordinates in this scenario. And also, Nina has been working on a document that got released in August that actually replaces the VoIP mobile class of service, the VMBL, with OMBL, and in this scenario recommends a VNOM class of service. And that would, so if a VoIP nomadic, you would see an address, and in the case where you saw XY coordinates, you could set it up based on OMBL. So if we had that standard and we followed it, this mapping would have matched perfectly. It didn't in this way because of the way we set up the mapping. But a call taker, if it comes in, they can adjust and just put in the address, and then it would map exactly. So there's ways to accommodating, but also areas, their CPE and how they set up their mapping, they can all be different. And for example, one area is telling me if they receive both a civic address and the XY coordinates, their mapping system will prefer the address. So it's knowing those scenarios and knowing when to change them, or if we should change them, or what we should tell the call taker, that we're kind of in the beginning of, not so much partly for RTT because of the app, but also because the change in types of calling that are out there. So this is an evolving example, and we'll probably have some more questions on this later. The next slide is from the AT&T iOS 12 from the exact same location. That one appears as the other calls, as a normal wireless call with XY coordinates. It plots on the map based on the XY coordinates pretty accurately, close to that 2418 address, and with confidence and uncertainty that you expect to see on a wireless call. Also set at 90. In the other slide, the confidence wasn't set at 90, but it wasn't a wireless call, and so you wouldn't have expected to normally use the XY coordinates in that case. So there are some differences we're working for, and also Nina has a new working group that's starting. Actually, the first call is going to be at this Friday on getting ready more for RTT, more for the advanced stages of RTT to RTT, but also to look at what's out there today and what we should be telling telecommunicators and what more testing we might need to do. For example, in some of the test calls, the baud dot tones started right away on some of the ones that were WPH2 calls. On some of the ones that came in Wi-Fi, the baud dot tone started, but only after you started typing. Now, whether that's the common scenario or not a common scenario, or whether that's something that really matters to the call taker, I'm not sure. But those are the things we're trying to learn and trying to figure out when is something significant to point out to the call takers, and when is then, no, they can just follow their normal procedures. So we're still trying to figure some of these fine points out, but the bottom line is both of these calls came in very accurate, I mean, in that they worked as designed. Whether every call would work as designed, that's, you have that issue with normal wireless calls. But in these two cases, if I was the caller and either one of those were the screenshots that appeared at the PSAP, that would be what I would hope to happen.
So now, hit one more slide for it. I think there was some animation here. Okay, perfect. So now we're going to get a little bit into the network design. I'm going to start off with an eye chart here for everybody to be able to see this. This is a kind of complex diagram we have going. But what I really wanted to show here between this is the idea of saying, first of all, it was sort of mentioned earlier, text to 911 is different than RTT. It's not the same thing. We deployed text to 911 a while ago, and on the carrier side, it's using SMS. It's as I sort of mentioned, it's a store and forward technology. On the PSAP side, it is the beginning of next gen from the standpoint that it's using IP, but it is purely a text type communications and doesn't include voice with it. And so while it works along well with RTT as a text mode to get to the PSAP, it uses a completely different infrastructure on how it goes along there. PSAPs that have deployed text are really starting down the path of being able to do RTT because they've introduced IP into their PSAP and be able to start delivering things, which is a necessary point as we move into the next gen networks. And so, but as we saw in that, it went through an element called a TCC, which really was the conversion of the SMS protocol into more I3 protocols. And then it went through an element of the network in getting into the PSAP. And as we move along to next gen, it fits in that next gen really well. The second two lines you see down there where it says MPC and GMLC and elements here, this is really what we have with the carrier, sort of irrespective of what they may be doing in their network, whether they're older type 3G voice or they've moved to 4G voice, which is an IP-based voice, or where they've gone. You've got the call, and what we really have here is we have two streams here. We have a media stream that's getting down to the PSAP, and we have a data stream that's coming back to ask for location. And in this legacy mode, we're using TTY. And it's a fairly simple model on how we're going to get there. As we move forward, where things start to get really complicated as we move into next gen. And you see on the bottom sections of this slide is showing the elements that are there for next gen. And if we were talking about RTT is only that the whole world was next gen, RTT is relatively simple. But as we look at that, we still have TTY involved, and we still have text and text or SMS text involved. That's where the complexities come in, and the complexities are challenges, and the complexities are really on the PSAP side of the world is where this is, because there's a lot of conversions that they're having to do. As we look at the elements below, this is a sort of a standard flow of where a call will go through a next-gen network to get from a carrier down to a PSAP. And one thing we have to think about, we often talk about a lot of things in next gen, as sort of the engineers we talk about the signaling, how elements talk to each other to go down along the line of getting that to a PSAP. One thing we often leave out is the media, the actual voice portion of it. In the case with RTT, the text portion of it, because the difference between text to 911 they use with SMS is that was a stream of just text. As we move to RTT, it is voice with a text component that's with a voice call. So as we traverse across the next gen network, we having to deliver it like a voice call going in, which has great advantages on the value it sort of brings, the simplicity and the mainstreaming of the RTT into the network, but it's got challenges because there's a lot of elements it touches. And as we deliver it through there, we have to look at all the elements that it may impact, the elements that may have to change and have to be upgraded for a PSAP to implement RTT. As we know, PSAPs have to implement to RTT, they're going to have something to receive it with. So on the far right-hand side, the I3 PSAP, and so I kind of show little stars here of elements that may have to be upgraded to support RTT and evolve to support RTT. So the PSAP has to have receiving equipment to be able to do it. Along the way, they have something of sort of a firewall or a gateway where they're going to receive their next-gen traffic, and the signaling in the media has to come through there, which supports RTT also. So that element has to do it. At the edge of the ESI net, there's another one of those, these firewalls that are in there, because we move to the IP world, we're having to protect from security type issues. That one has to support it. A challenge comes in with RTT is we may have to transfer the calls. We have to record the calls. So there's the transfer, bridging the call to another point has to deal with the RTT and how you're bridging that RTT. And are you going to bridge it to a PSAP that has TTY too? So now you have to come TTY in, RTT in, RTT to a PSAP, but TTY to another PSAP because they don't support RTT. The complexities of those. And so just wanted to show that there's a lot of complexities for the PSAPs on implementing this. The simplest mode is if we implement this when it's a pure RTT. And so as we get more and more PSAPs that are next gen, the implementation of RTT becomes a lot simpler. It's the legacy PSAPs that are going to be causing us all the challenges as we're deploying this. On the next slide, Jeff. As we talk on the next one, this is really the complexities as we have in general. The legacy network gateways, these are the gateways that will come from the wireless carriers into the network and they're having to convert, particularly when there's an ESI net, where they may have to be, there's the conversions that are dealing with to RTT and TTY. Legacy PSAP gateways, this is a really big challenge when there's some PSAPs on here that are legacy. Maybe they're not even part of the ESI net. Maybe they're a neighboring jurisdiction that there's no control to get them to move to an ESI net, but the call has to be transferred there. How do we deal with that transfer, dealing with this one? Another issue is mid-call upgrades, where you have a voice call to start with, and at some point during that call, you convert to RTT. That's great if it's a native RTT PSAP. What if that call was transferred to an RTT PSAP and then it was transferred to a TTY PSAP? How do we deal with that? These use cases are challenging. Again, I talked about TTY to RTT transfers, the dialogues on transfer. One of the things that we've really gotten used to is we're starting to do on text to 911, we have the ability to transfer the entire dialogue along with the call. So when one PSAP answers a text to 911 call and it's transferred to another PSAP, that dialogue, as we're looking at doing it, is transferred to the new PSAP, so they see all the conversations that were done in advance. May we be able to do that in some way with RTT? That's not part of it right now, looking at what we may want to do there. And another thing is we look at is testing that was going to need to be done. Because we have receivers on both ends, the device on the handset side and the call handling equipment that's going to receive the RTT call, think about the compatibility testing we're going to make sure we need to do. We had this in earlier days with VoIP itself, when we had VoIP devices that one type of a phone couldn't talk to another type of a phone. The standards that are out there for IP and VoIP are standards that don't necessarily define the exact implementation you take. So we're going to have to work through this on the PSAP side on defining these implementations and making sure we have compatibility, and where will that testing be done, because there are a large number of receiving devices at the PSAP side that may be receiving these calls. And then as we look about that, verifying all the use cases of all these sort of edge cases that I talked about earlier on transfers and so on. Thank you.
Did we lose our slides? Additional complexity. All right.
There you go.
There we go. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the RTT and TTY interworking. So this is a picture of kind of the world today. We saw demonstrations earlier from the wireless carriers about their ability to establish real-time text communications. There is, from the carriers, the wireless carriers today, if I were to use my real-time text device and dial 911, I would reach, it would be converted to TTY by the carriers and be delivered to the same PSAP that it would go if I had just dialed a voice call. And I want to emphasize that point because I think it is significant and wonderful that the rollout of RTT allows successful text communications with 911 today. And that is, it is great. It is part of the design that as real-time text is being rolled out in wireless networks and among wireless devices and eventually wireline, that there is a transition path that ensures that people have continued ability to communicate in whatever form that they need. It's also another difference between the SMS to 911, where there's the possibility of a bounce-back message for areas in which it is not supported. With real-time text today, it is supported because of its backward compatibility to TTY. So as we've heard today, there are limitations when there is that communication. In my next slide, I'm going to go into that a little bit more. But I want to just emphasize the value of that conversion and what it facilitates in terms of successful communication. Now, on this diagram right here, you see some terminology on the device. That would be the wireless carrier's device. And then the carriers, that's meant to be those such as we saw earlier with AT&T and Verizon that support real-time text on some of their mobile devices, and T-Mobile as well. Got you, Drew. Now, one thing that we've also talked about TTY communications over an IP network, and that in general, TTY communications over an IP network is subject to problems. And I have a lot of experience in that, and many of those problems stem around when the IP network is unable to correctly send every packet that it's supposed to send correctly. Now, for PSAPs right now that have an ESI net, your communication, if an RTT call is being placed to you right now, is going RTT from the wireless phone device to the wireless carrier. That carrier is converting it to a TTY signal, which is being delivered however it comes into your ESI net, where it is being converted to an IP signal being delivered to your PSAP. Now that leg of it on an ESI net, if you have an IP-based ESI net, that is going to be TTY tones delivered over that internet network. Now in practical terms, so long as your ESI net provider manages their network such that there is very minimal loss or disruption or delay or jitter or any of those characteristics, which they should be doing, your communication will go and be TTY and work rather well. So I just wanted to point that out today. All right, I wanted to show up here a side-by-side comparison of a communication that could occur using real-time text and a communication that could occur just using TTY. Now, this isn't meant to showcase that one would be necessarily transcoded to the other, but it is intended to show some of the different etiquette characteristics that are possible with real-time text versus TTY. So on the left-hand side, we see real-time text. We see somebody using, they say, let's celebrate, what time do you want to meet? And one party is asking that question. The other party responds with at noon in the middle of that. So that kind of showcases the full duplex nature of real-time text, that a user, as they become familiar with this communication, will naturally recognize that they don't have to wait for their turn in order to start communicating and to responding back, and that they have the full keyboard available to them. Additionally, you can see on real-time text there's an opportunity to utilize the upper and lower case for a semantic purpose. In this case, celebrate is emphasized because it is capitalized versus the rest of the text. Now, those types of things are not possible with TTY communications. As we've learned, TTYs have a limited character set, and as we all know that they require turn taking. And so the same type of communication cannot occur in the same way, and it facilitates a different type of communication etiquette, how the users choose to communicate with each other. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, as we've been doing some trials of real-time text and giving people opportunities, people that are deaf, hard of hearing, that are familiar with text-based communications and TTY-based communications, it's interesting to note how quickly the TTY conventions from an etiquette standpoint are being ignored. When you have two bubbles, it feels very natural to say, this is my bubble, I can type in it whatever I want, whenever I want it to. And so that facilitates a natural transition, which does bring up some challenges at the PSAP standpoint, because at a PSAP, receiving a call that is going through transcoding, there is little, if any, evidence of whether that call is RTT on the device side or whether it's not. It could be a TTY. If I go back to this, what slide am I on? As you can see in this picture, a call coming into a PSAP can either be a TTY call coming in or an RTT call that has been converted. But at the PSAP, there's very little from a communication standpoint that would indicate that the original side is an RTT device. And so it brings up some opportunities for training challenges. There may be an influx, for many PSAPs, they get very few TTY calls today. There can be an uptick in them because of the the ease at which mobile devices today can support real-time text, and with more and more devices coming out. All right. So this is a picture that shows what it's going to be eventually as ESI nets support real-time text natively. Now, one of the big pieces that changes is in an environment where you have an ESI net that is RTT capable, that ESI net takes on the responsibility of doing that transcoding. It takes it on from the wireless carriers. So the wireless carriers will be delivering real-time text to the ESI net and will no longer, for those sets of calls, be doing the backward compatibility. They'll still be doing it for other calls, but when it is delivered to an ESI net that has RTT capability, the ESI net now takes on that responsibility when it needs to deliver that call to a legacy PSAP, and when it needs to deliver a call to an I3 PSAP, it allows that communication to go through as RTT. And as John mentioned, that having this type of architecture causes a lot of complexity with some of the use cases, specifically surrounding things like call transfers, especially between PSAPs that are I3 and legacy PSAPs. So in summary here, RTT to TTY working allows RTT-capable wireless phones to dial 911 today and have successful text communications, and that's fantastic. Wireless carriers, ESINet providers, and PSAPs, they'll be phasing out TTY, but the architecture and the plan allows that to occur incrementally without some type of massive, today we're going to do our TTY, and then tomorrow everyone is going to do RTT. It allows that to be transitioned incrementally so that there is stability and reliability in our communications. And there is, the gateway is not a long-term solution. It is an interim solution. There's some complexities around when you have to manage at an ESINet standpoint both the legacy and the I3 PSAPs. There, done.
Well, thank you. That was a great presentation. Sorry.
I guess there's one more slide. I'm not sure that this one's my slide.
You go for it.
Did you want to talk about that, or?
Actually, I have the very last slide.
Okay. So the question is, what should PSAPs do? Talk to your vendors, your ESINet vendors, about their plans for RTT integration. If you don't support SMS to 911, consider implementing a solution implementing solutions that support direct RTT. And ultimately, the goal is to allow RTT to make 911 directly accessible to everyone. All right. I think this one's yours.
This is the NINA RTT Readiness Work Group that is just starting. If you're a 911 authority, or if you're a PSAP, if you're someone that does training, if you're someone who's interested in RTT, the more people that are involved, the better the solutions and perspectives we can get. So if you're able to, please consider joining the work group.
Thank you. So, Richard, sticking with you, but all panelists, please feel free to jump in on any of these questions. Let's get into an overview of the status of RTT today. Do PSAPs have an estimated volume of RTT to TTY conversion 911 calls? And do wireless carriers have an estimated volume of RTT to TTY conversion 911 calls?
I've heard for years that, just in passing, that PSAPs really don't receive many, if any, TTY calls. And in trying to verify that with some information for the panel, apparently, once you subtract out the regular test calls that are made, in some cases, actually quite a number of test calls, but once you subtract those out, they appear to be as close to zero as you can get, if not zero. And we're still investigating to make sure we're not missing something, but everything that I've seen from the areas I've sampled is we are not currently getting TTY calls, and since the beginning of the year when RTT came along, still have not seen that change.
Drew or John, have 911 system service providers received requests for RTT to RTT yet, or are there any publicly known projected deployment dates?
So, at least for the carriers that we're working with, we haven't received any yet. We've been talking to, since we kind of deal with both sides, we deal with the PSAP side and we deal with the carrier side. It's a lot more that the discussions are starting on the PSAP side on putting together what do they need to do to put a request in. And the biggest parts around that are what do they need to do to be RTT capable, which, as I sort of talked about in the presentation, there's stuff that will have to be done on the ESI net that they attach to, be it statewide or local or regional or whatever it may be, and on the CPE side. There's a lot of work to be done with that. We haven't received requests yet for service from the PSAP side even. So that's, so I'll say from that standpoint, we haven't received any yet.
I'm going to put on my hat from a couple years ago when I was CTO of Telecommunications Systems, which is now Comtech TCS. During that time, I know Wes was also doing this, we were getting proposals from state and local governments to deploy ESI nets, yes. And they were looking at call handling solutions. And there were specifications in there for real-time text because it was defined enough from the protocols to understand what was going to be delivered. But as far as it goes, it is not something that gets turned on quickly. I don't know if any of them have registered with the FCC, and I don't believe they have. And I do know that those deployments are still working more around the ESINet side of things and not necessarily fully deploying the call handling yet. So there's still a little bit of gap in time between the carrier readiness and the PSAP readiness right now.
I would say we've had a draft request letter ready for about a year, but because we have not been able to verify on the CPE side and on the IPSR or ESINet side that both of those are ready, then there's no point in making a request to the carrier if we're not ready on our side. So that is being investigated, and we continue to reach out to the CPE vendors, to the ESINet vendors to see what that timeline is and find out, if there's any information they're missing, that they need from the carriers. And so we have been trying to pursue that, but it has not, John said, has not gone very far to this point yet.
Thank you. Given that location is very important for any 911 call, John, could you please talk a little bit more about how the location is done for RTT 911 calls? Given so many different combinations that exist, whether it's native or app, whether it goes through EZNet or doesn't go through EZNet, whether it gets converted to TTY, whether it gets transferred, all those combinations. Could you touch upon those and say how the location is done for those calls?
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges we had originally with text to 911 was location before RTT. And it was the aspect of the only location we could really use. There wasn't location as part of SMS. And so the only location that we could utilize was types of commercial location that may be available. And because of restrictions by different handset OEMs and how they did things, really the only reliable location we could ever get, and even that's true today, is cell site-based location. As we move to RTT, whether it's an app-based version or an over-the-top version of it, or whether it's built in natively, it now, as I kind of was talking about earlier, it's part of a voice call. So now the mechanisms that we built with inside the wireless carriers networks and all the infrastructure that we've been building for years is based around locating voice calls and not around locating SMS calls. And so as RTT becomes a component of voice and it just becomes another media stream that we're saying is going to be textual or it's going to be sort of an audible version, it allows us to use that same mechanisms to locate the call. So every time we're looking at all the increased accuracy, location accuracy of 911 and all the things that are occurring with that now on the voice side. The nice thing is RTT gets to take the advantage of all of those. And so as we upgrade voice location capability, RTT benefits in that because it just becomes a component. It uses the same infrastructure. Whether an over-the-top app has some more challenges on how it may pass it along because, as Richard and others were talking earlier, It really looks, some of those look like a VoIP call. And so it's more about the display of that and the interpretation from the PSAP than anything else. On a regular, a CMRS type call, cellular call, then now it's handled a lot more like it's really like the voice call. As it comes into the PSAPs, whether it goes into a legacy PSAP or it goes into a next gen PSAP, the location will be the same. And so it comes to, so whatever they get with voice, they will also get with RTT on either of the technologies.
Thanks. Mark?
So just a comment on that. We keep looking at RTT and tying it back to the legacy voice infrastructure. And I think one thing that we're forgetting is that we've got an IP session to an IP endpoint. And with all the advancements that are coming out today with the Google AML and the Apple Hilo, we're talking about device-based location being able to be generated and then transmitted over an IP infrastructure. Even transmitted when an IP infrastructure doesn't exist point to point. So I think we have to stop looking at the legacy voice technologies for location-based and look to the future for the IP-based technologies that are inherent in the devices and able to be transported by the network. And those are there that can be ingested and consumed by a next-gen PSAP, by a legacy PSAP, or even through a web browser in a manual environment. And I think it's important that we look to that and consider that for location requirements moving forward and not be handcuffed by the legacy technologies.
Let me just answer a little bit more to that. One of the things to remember is with RTT, we're still traversing through the network with the voice call. Whether it's legacy or not, it doesn't really matter. We're traversing, the voice is going along, and then the RTT text is going along the path with the voice call as it's getting to the PSAP or wherever it's wanting to go. The location technologies, as we look at today on the wireless carrier and as we look at other supplemental locations, are separate from that. It's a location. So today you get a voice call and there's an infrastructure that's put in place to locate where that voice call is. That technology is changing. It's being done as Mark was sort of saying on that. Apple announced Hilo. They've done the Hilo to get the location. That's part of the whole new increased location accuracy that I was talking about. We get faster accuracy. That's being transmitted multiple ways. It's being transmitted where it is through the carriers on getting down. It's being transmitted through ESI nets. And it's being transmitted over the top around ESI nets getting into a PSAP. And that's a choice for PSAPs to say, what's my best way to get my location coming into me? How do I want to deal with that? What's the best of it is? And there's not a single solution that's best for any one PSAP on how that may come down. So the RTT is still sort of tied with a voice call. What I'd be scared to see is to say, I want to split this RTT from the voice call. I wouldn't want to see us to say, I want to take this RTT and split it off and send it out some other way and come into a PSAP one direction and have the voice come in a separate direction and us deal with that. So today we're stuck with a little bit of the idea of voice and legacy. I mean, our next gen networks are still tied of sending voice through the networks as we're getting through there. So all the data is put together in one path, getting down to the PSAP is combined together. The location can come from more sources. That's not tied to the legacy, but there's different ways of doing it. The nice part is you will see the benefit of all these technologies, whether it's a supplemental location technology or it's what the carriers are doing is natively on being able to pass it through and getting down. And the only difference really between those is the timing of when those things are available.
Thank you.
Yes. Historically, we've kind of had these three boxes. Dispatchable location, which somebody would think of as wireline. Someone installed that line, you know it's there. Registered location in a VoIP context, nomadic, where you're not sure, and then the XY coordinates for the wireless. As some of this discussion has shown, some of those are converging. For example, well, if my registered location VoIP was really with my cable provider, I might move that into my dispatchable location, either by the class of service or recognizing it came from a Comcast, or because I know that one doesn't move. And now you're seeing this same convergence in wireless as we get to new technologies. And the extent of cooperation that you have may determine, okay, I classify this as registered location, or that's registered location, but it was an alternate if dispatchable location failed, or now you have dispatchable location, or you will in the future, on wireless. So as these merge, we need to understand it and be able to explain it to the PSAPs and the telecommunicators so they can make whatever changes are appropriate in their training. But as John said, it's part of the call evolution. It's not necessarily RTT specific, but it is happening.
And I think an important point, too, is that with the current deployment by RapidSOS of AML and Hilo, you're covering, the stat I saw, you're covering 99.6% of mobile devices, smartphones, with smartphones that are out there.
So
That's significant.
What we want to do, though, is make sure we understand the difference between location accuracy, and actually delivery, okay? One of the challenges you have in this industry is that there are a lot of players at in 3 different stages. There's the device side, there's the delivery side, and there's this public safety answering point side. And NINA, APCO, organizations like that work with standards to try and ensure interoperability, which is one of the challenges we have as we roll out a new technology, ensuring interoperability to make sure these capabilities work. So I don't think there's an argument that the different accuracy or different location technologies are improving. Everybody agrees with it. I think the next challenge is how can we deliver it to the PSAP? And I think that that's already in the standards, and with the lost architecture,
Right.
You have a location standard that actually traverses along with the call, which is a fascinating capability. But ultimately, the final part of it is how do you deliver it into the public safety answering point so they can consume it? And there is a limiting factor there at this stage. And as these PSAPs evolve, they will be able to get better capabilities in that, and they have to be standards-based, or you're going to have to change all the interconnectivity all the way back to the device, and that just means it can't be used. So we have to keep our eyes open as to, yes, new and evolving technology comes in. How do we enter it into an existing ecosystem in such a way that all the parties of the ecosystem can benefit and deliver a better and improved solution?
Thank you. Given that a lot of, I'm not going to say there are no PSAPs that are RTT ready. Given that we don't know for sure, which PSAPs are RTT ready, or they're still doing legacy TTY. How does the end user know? What is it that PSAP is doing? Is it RTT or is it TTY? The reason I'm asking is that how do they know what proper etiquette to follow? You could say, for instance, to be on the safe side, let's assume that all the PSAPs right now are legacy TTY. So you as a RTT user, consumer, just put a GA at the end of your message. Type your message, put a GA at the end, and wait for the other side to send and have a GA in there. So basically, you're even though RTT, but you're really taking turns. So my question to you is that, how would the end user know what is it that he's dealing with in terms of the PSAP? Are they RTT or are they a TTY? And we could go to Jeff or anyone.
I'll give a comment on that, and I think I'll flip that around a little bit and say that it should be the role of the PSAP to adapt their etiquette to whatever etiquette the caller chooses to use.
Thank you. I was going to actually follow-up question, ask what should the PSAP do? Because really, it takes two to tango here. So, but really, need to know what is it that both sides need to know, because if they're not aware of their capabilities, they may not have the proper etiquette, and there is always the risk of garbling. And for 911 call, that's the last thing you want. So what are the best practices? What does the standard say?
There is no indication back to the RTT device that its call is being translated en route by a gateway to TTY. Okay? The standards are silent on that, essentially. Okay? There's no indication it goes back to the device. That being the case, as an end user of the device, you're going to practice your initial etiquette. And when you get a reply back, you may adjust it or not, depending on what you see in that reply. It is going to be a bit of a communications, a bit of an opportunity for people to learn to communicate more as efficiently as they can within that construct. You do have bubbling, you do have GA and SK that go back and forth. If you type on a TTY, the GA or the SK, that will come back to me. That would indicate to me, if I'm using RTT, that, oh yes, I'm talking to somebody on a TTY device. So there are indicators, but there's not a flag that says you're being translated.
Right. I mean, on follow-up on that question is about going back, backspacing, auto-correcting, auto-completing things. That would work fine because the standard has been defined for RTT to RTT. But what would happen when you're making an RTT to TTY? And your RTT device goes back or does autocomplete or things like that. What happens at the TTY at the other end?
We've actually done some testing with TTY devices where when you backspaced, it actually backspaced on the TTY device. But
yeah, there are certain things that do change, and we've tried to test those. I mean, today, it converts back to TTY, so you do see the GA and the Q automatically on both sides. When we get to the full real-time text to real-time text, that's one of the issues I would hope the NINA committee that I mentioned earlier could go into the details, and we could provide advice to the consumer and to the PSAP in those scenarios. But like Drew said, we've tested the conversion, have not been able to test the RTT to RTT, so I'm not sure we don't know what we don't know yet, but hopefully that can come out more as we go further along.
And some of the aspects, I think, that a little bit of the experience that we've gotten with SMS to TTY conversion, there's some similarities between that. We've got the differences in the character sets as they go across. We've got the differences, the collision of the take-turn type things that may not, I mean, how the systems would handle that and what was done. Because, I mean, a lot of, we look at these gateways that are converting RTT to TTY have some similar challenges when we had the SMS to TTY conversion there. So we experienced a lot. And unfortunately, that was from the standpoint of the users and the PSAPs, the experience wasn't good. There were a lot of challenges with that. And to me, it's an area that worries me a lot on how that will be done. And hopefully that's a great, it's an encouragement of thinking about that PSAPs will move quicker to move towards RTT solutions.
That's a great segue for my next question is that, RTT provides, much richer, character sets, emojis and other things that TTY doesn't have it. So RTT user, not knowing what is it that the TTY PSAP is going to receive, is going to put all those stuff in there. And what's going to happen when the PSAP receives that? Maybe I'm expressing my emotions, through characters or through, emojis, thinking that I don't want to write all of those. Express that I'm right in peril now. I need help or whatever, with signs, symbols. And what happens to them when it gets to TTY? Do they get all dropped? Do they get translated to something that is meaningful? What happens to them? Is there a standard, first of all? When the RTT is transferred to TTY, does the standard say what to do about these issues? Or is it like the vendors decide what to do that? Drop them, put a placeholder, or do something?
So maybe I can take a first stab at answering that. So that topic is one that has the fancy name of transliteration. And there's been a lot of discussion about transliteration, and it's my understanding that in general, the people that do the RTT to TTY transcoding today, they also employ some level of transliteration so that when a character comes in to be translated to TTY and it is unable to be rendered because TTY has so few characters, that there is a natural replacement character or a mapping. So there's simple ones, like if a character comes in either an upper or lowercase character, that is alphanumeric, or it would be translated to the appropriate and the same uppercase character as a TTY. So that's the simple one that makes a lot of sense. The other, which is a standard, and it is a standard from the ITU called V.18, and it's my understanding that it is an acceptable way to transliterate. It may not be the only way, but it's an acceptable way to transliterate, is that in the situation where you send an emoji on the RTT side or some other character that cannot be rendered as a TTY character, that there is a single apostrophe that is a replacement character, so that the person that is receiving the TTY side, whether or not that person is at the PSAP or, you know, if at the device side, that they would have an indication that something was typed, even though they may not know exactly what it was. And the rules for transliteration are, that's really the simplistic view of it. That's not to say that people that do RTT to TTY gateways only do that. There may be other approaches for transliterations. I've also seen that when people do the @ symbol, that sometimes they write out the words AT in order to convey that meaning.
Yeah, that's great, but it would be really even better if there was a standard, so from both ends, people would see or get a consistent, experience. It's not that one company would do it a certain way and it appeared that message in a certain way, and the second company will do it a different way, and it may appear, so user may not experience the same, consistent experience. So.
To my understanding, just about everyone that I'm aware of is using that V.18 standard for replacement character. I'm not aware of others that are doing it differently, but maybe that's all I'll say.
Is there in V.18 is pretty old. I don't know if there's a new version of it. That's an ITU standard. How is that standard still completely applicable? Let me put it this way.
Well, I think the short answer is yes, to the extent that for real-time text is using that portion of V.18 for that, to solve that transliteration problem during this interim time period. I mean, the other aspects of V.18 talk about how a TTY device in the United States, or how you can have sort of a universal device that communicates with text, both in the United States as well as other European areas that have completely different technologies. It's been around for a long time, and it's still in force, although with the adoption of real-time text, its impact is getting less and less. And it does bring up one aspect of real-time text. It's not necessarily applicable specifically to PSAPs in the United States, but it's helpful to note that real-time text is not just a United States standard that we are implementing, and that it is also being implemented for emergency services overseas, and as a replacement for many of the V.18 legacy text communication protocols.
Yeah, two parts of that, right? IETF and SIP form are where you're seeing the specifications for RTT. TTY, I challenge you to go out and find a manufacturer who's making new TTY terminals. It's very difficult. It is an old standard. There's not a market for it. There's nobody looking at it saying, I need to update the standard to adapt to this RTT. So what RTT is doing during this transition is we're adapting to the TTY, and by necessity. And I think that that's just the nature of this transitionary time period. I mean, the advocacy here is let's do what we can to help public safety and other endpoints, because not just public safety, other endpoints transition from TTY to RTT quicker. And that's really the best place to invest our time, effort, and monies as a society to get real-time text taking off.
Thank you. Let's change gear and let's talk a little bit, I guess David Ford mentioned this earlier, about the interaction between RTT and SMS text to 911. Given that, there are PSAPs that are already doing SMS, MMS text to 911, and they're not fully IP, what are their options in terms of, adopting RTT? What would happen, with adoption? Do you see any interaction between them?
So I'll kind of start. That's a large question. On being able to do it. So When a PSAP did text to 911, they did sort of two advantages that they had. First of all, their call takers, depending on how it was implemented on their call handling, whether it was integrated into their call handling or it was a web-based browser. I'll talk more towards the integrated. If it was integrated, now you started to create an experience that call takers were starting to receive these messages and what they were. As we've implemented some of those, as RTT is planned to be implemented, that interface would be the same interface. So as they would move to receive RTT, they would receive it the same, except they may see the characters come across as they're typing, and it'd be real time. And they have the chance, depending on, as I've discovered a little bit about some of the client implementations, they may or may not hear audio in the background. To be able to get the audio on the same. But many times when they implemented it, they took it as a call because it was planning to have RTT replace it at some part in the future. But what they have done is they implemented IP. When they need to move to RTT, it's the next step. They need to implement IP voice because the RTT stream's coming over with the voice stream, so they need to implement that portion of it. That's the part that does it for them. As they receive it into their system, it's not too much of a stretch from how it was before, except the character set is now even increased because with SMS, we have a limited character set that we can receive, and emoticons were some limitations around some of that. The different challenges is as you move there, now you're going to have to send the RTT through the ESI net and make sure that is traverses. And the wireless carrier has to connect into the ESI net as IP, so we have this full IP end-to-end point. At that part, their text solution probably migrates a bit too, because if their PSAP was not IP voice, their text came in through an IP link. It was the beginning, but it didn't traverse the same path as their voice. So now as they move to RTT, they'll still have the text, but it's going to traverse the same I3 network that the RTT will traverse, that the IP voice will traverse, and that the text, which is over protocol MSRP, will traverse.
Thank you. I have a twofold question, basically about the future of RTT. Do you see RTT, replacing or complementing, SMS text? And what do you see for the future of RTT? Do you think other texting, technologies like RCS or WebRTC, would they have any impact on RTT? Since RTT is just taking, starting its journey. Do you see any impact from RCS, WebRTC? Mark, maybe you want to take this question. And the impact with the existing SMS text to 911.
Clearly, you're moving to an IP architecture, so in implementing RTT, you're setting the path or you're setting the standard in your agency to receive other forms, whether it be RCS, whether it be WebRTC, whether it be something new that hasn't even been invented yet. You also enable the ability for MMS or multimedia. So an impact, the impact is it's setting the stage for the future. Fortunately, that stage will be compatible. We'll have future compatibility, not something we get to enjoy all the time.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to chime in?
I'd just like to chime in just a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I find that it's amazing that over the years, as technology has been introduced in many ways because of some accessibility needs, it causes people to use it in ways that are not related to accessibility at all. You can think of things like going to watching a football game at a restaurant with the captions on, and a number of other circumstances. And so I think for real-time text that it is a successor protocol to TTY, but it isn't limited to an accessibility function, that it is something that is available, mainstream devices, mainstream technology, and we really don't quite know today how it's going to be adopted. I mean, when I would have never have guessed that text messaging was going to be adopted by by everyone as a mainstream way of communicating. And so I think the jury is out in terms of how real-time text is going to enrich our ability to communicate with each other. And I don't see that as competing with RCS or SMS. I see that as just yet another option. And this one happens to accompany a voice communication. It is reliable. We've seen, in circumstances where you're having a voice plus RTT call, and you may be in a situation where your voice communication is difficult because of either background noise or because of some type of you're in bad coverage area or something, that the real-time text is able to be successful. So I think the jury is still out on how it will be adopted, but I think it will be adopted, and likely in ways that we can't predict right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll totally agree with Jeff on that, because the problem is that TTY today is targeted at a specific user community, specifically deaf, hard of hearing, et cetera. With that available to everybody ubiquitously, as Jeff said, you don't know the use cases. While we were at this panel, I received 3 phone calls from my daughter that I hit ignore on. I finally got a text message, I need to borrow $50. That's today's 20-year-olds, innovative. She needs money, she knows how to get it. You're going to find that with emergency communications. They're going to use whatever they need in a time of need.
Yeah, I think we have the real technologies that are out there, and it's really how they're implemented. I think you look at today, you see the implementation of RTT on the user equipment is very different from some different implementations we see. And how that ends up getting implemented will be how people will respond to being able to use it. To the true technology of SMS is going to go away, but batch mode communications may not, because some people are very comfortable with typing the message and then hitting send, and are not comfortable with seeing their characters go across character by character. To me, it's more the usability, the use of how it's on the phone, how OEMs implement it, how people implement it, more than it is the technology itself. How they're going to utilize it. Where we're going to evolve from, SMS is going away in many places now, and it's evolving. It's a different technology. It's moving to IP anyway on what it's doing. But batch mode is still, that batch mode where I send a message is still very popular. So that's going to be, how the technologies come together, how they fuse it. I kind of look at like what Apple did with Apple Messenger. They fused 3 or 4 different texting technologies together and put it into one client. As we see that being done with RTT, if we see that being done and being fused together with other technology and being hopefully brought mainstream, so it's not a separate technology. The underlying technologies can be anything they are. It's really how the device is implemented and how users use it.
So we need to be careful when we look at these technologies, is understand that they are distinct.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned MMS, RCS, SMS. There's a lot of S's. When all said and done, these are different types of technologies that are designed to deliver different type of payloads to different devices and through different types of network architectures. What we're seeing with real-time text, and the reason I'm saying that is to kind of build up to with real-time text to your question, where do we see it going? Real-time text is exactly that. It is real-time text, okay? It's not real-time video. That exists differently. It is not real-time multimedia. That's a different thing. So I think what it's doing is it's giving us now a second method of communicating between a mobile device and either an answering center, a PSAP, or some other in-device community like that, that really leverages the capabilities of this new generation of IP technology. And we will see, and I think we will eventually evolve to other types of capabilities that won't be called real-time text, but they will leverage the IP network that we're built and are delivering. And I think that's kind of pulls together all the things we're talking about here. So, we understand what they are. And from a public safety perspective, this is really going to be another one of those incentives, I think, for the public safety community to see the value of going to next gen. If they haven't seen already all the different opportunities and values there, I think this will really be a value.
I just want to add something to that, Drew. We have in the United States right now, a lot of the communication is being built up, but there's still some pieces that are legacy in the middle, selective routers, these TDM infrastructure pieces. Supporting real-time text communications end-to-end from a mobile device through to a PSAP means that you have sort of gotten rid of the old and put in a new infrastructure that is IP-based. And in many ways, real-time text can be a driver and a catalyst to motivate all parties to get to that place where you have an end-to-end IP interconnection. And once that's in place, there are a number of exciting things that can be built upon that having the legacy pieces in place have an ability to hold us back from innovating. But once that is gone and it's all IP end-to-end, there's an opportunity to build new things on top of that.
That's a really good point. And probably one of the things that excites me, I think is great about RTT, is the implementation of RTT, because it requires that IP end-to-end, pushes all the parties that are independent now to move towards the next gen 911 architecture. It requires the carrier to come in over IP to connect into the ESI net. It requires the ESI net to get rid of its legacy pieces and make sure it supports the IP pieces going through. It makes sure that the PSAP is supporting IP infrastructure going through, and the location and everything else flowing through through the IP network. So everybody, we have the chicken and the egg problem here. I mean, how do we really get going on, I mean, what's first? Where do we get started on, really for next gen, we have that issue. RTT is one of those great starters for that.
So, thank you. Yeah.
So we have one question from the audience before we get started with this one. I don't know if anyone else has any more questions. We had one that came in. But this question asks, if a state provides an ESINet for all PSAPs, do you agree that it should be the state that coordinates the deployment of RTT to the PSAP? If so, would the state make the request for RTT to individual wireless providers, or to whom?
I think that's a question for the FCC, right?
There's also a second part. What do state 911 programs with a statewide ESINet need to do to deal with the backward compatibility requirement?
I think, Jeff went through a diagram, and John talked a lot of the detail about how to take the ESI net, what do you have to have embedded in it to support legacy. The challenge has been for quite some time is the funding availability at the state and local level to execute these next-gen 911 deployments, because the technology is new. There's a lot of pain that you have to go through to do that. And it's not inexpensive to do this transition. And during it, there's a lot of training that has to occur. There's security implications. It's very complicated. And I think having a good plan for execution is critical to getting started with it. And the states, local government, federal government are all going to have to figure out that aspect of it. And we're standing by. We're ready to support what we can in terms of providing the capability.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I look at, if I look at the complexities, if a PSAP was to request this, if a single PSAP in a network is going to request it, it's going to be hard. Because the coordination of how they would work with the other PSAPs on the ESI net, which ESI net, does the ESI net have the capabilities, who pays for the different capabilities that's occurring in there. If only one PSAP wants RTT and none of the others do, and they're part of an ESI net, and there's a cost that's involved with that, where does that go? And so ideally, if it's, as a state level, it's the larger the groups are getting together to coordinate it, making sure the ESI net gets up to the capability it needs, and the requests come in and for that network, and then ideally would be all the PSAPs on board are moving to RTT at the same time. If we can implement this as big solutions instead of a bunch of little islands, it will speed up the capability of being able to be done.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience or from people participating online?
Thank you, panelists. You've had a lot of good information for us today, and I think my big takeaway and concern before I got here and still today is the lack of awareness to the PSAP side and the lack of awareness to the user side. And both of those in this interim solution time are going to have communication problems. And I guess I would ask us to come together in forming some kind of messaging and stating, as we make others aware throughout the country, that this is an interim solution and that there are limitations. Because I think we can all agree that RTT implemented in its fullest state will be fabulous. But in the meantime, our call takers, our telecommunicators, and the users of RTT are going to face major challenges that could result in a loss of life. So we must take this seriously. And even if we don't have many TTY calls today, many of those deaf and hard of hearing people have moved to text messaging, and they may indeed be educated, aware, and start using RTT. So I like to look at history. In this case, though, I think we need not to take it for granted that we won't see RTT calls. And so I think we have to address those limitations. And I know in the NINA PSAP group that you referred to, we have operational people as well as technologists. So we will be working on best practices for training and SOPs. And some of us have already started testing in the PSAPs, and we're working on an advanced testing plan right now with many different variables that we can document to be a starting point for some of those operational documents, but also information for PSAPs around the country. And I guess my last concern is the time I think it's going to take to reach full RTT. I made the request to both my CPE provider and my EZNet provider a couple months ago and got the feedback that it would be at least 6 months before they could come up with solutions or pricing. And so I think as 911 professionals, we are going to have to push the market, and we're going to have to make those requests, because as much as I'd like to think they're going to do it for Christy Williams at North Central Texas COG, they need to hear from numerous customers in the PSAP community saying, we want this, we need this, and we need this soon. And so I would urge all of us as a PSAP community to move forward with our providers in making these requests, because as you know, we can't begin to make the request to the carriers until this technology is worked out. Thank you.
Well, this brings us to the end of this portion of the program. I'd like to thank all the panelists for, on behalf of Nelly and myself, for very informative and productive panel. I have a lot of other questions, which some of them are going to save for the next portion of the program. At this point, we're going to take a very short 10 minutes bio break, and please come back in 10 minutes, and then we'll start Ask the Expert portion of the panel. And if you have any questions, please have them ready for that portion. Thank you.
If everyone can please take their seats.
Just got back from California.
We're going to start in 1 minute. All right. Are we good? Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This last panel was incredibly informative. Thank you for that. And we have our Ask the Experts panel now. So as we mentioned before, you can submit questions by either writing on a note card that are found in the back in the room and handing them to Michael Scott, who's sitting at our laptop table, or emailing live questions at fcc.gov. We also have a microphone available for anyone in the room. So who is our moderator for this panel? Richard Ray. He is the co-chair of our Emergency Communications Subcommittee for the Disability Advisory Committee. He is the ADA Technology Access Coordinator for the City of Los Angeles and is actively involved. He's co-chair of the NENA Accessibility Committee. And as a co-chair for the Emergency Communications Subcommittee, he is very active in Next Gen 911. Emergency communication systems, and state and federal level emergency communications. So welcome, Richard.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for that introduction. It is an honor for me to be here with the group this afternoon. Before we dive into the questions, I would like to ask that we quickly go through our panelists who are up here before the audience. If you could introduce yourself by name for the benefit of the audience who is watching the video stream, who may have joined us in progress. I think it'd be important for us to make sure we know who all is here. We'll start to my left.
Mark Fletcher, Avaya, Chief Architect, Worldwide Public Safety.
Jeff Knighton, President, Hamilton Innovations.
Drew Moore with T-Mobile.
Richard Muscat, Director of Regulatory, Bear Metro 911 Network, Texas 911 Alliance.
John Snap, VP of Technology, West Safety Services.
Linda Vanderloop, AT&T.
Christian Vogler, Gallaudet University Technology Access Program.
And Ian Dillner with Verizon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those introductions. I think that will really help. We have a whole host of questions to pose to you this afternoon, which excites me, and I get to be the one to pose them to you. There are questions both from the audience, from our remote audience who is watching online, and I will get us started. The first question that I have is, for RTT, how does RTT roaming work? John? Drew?
Okay, well, I'll start as the representative of one of the carriers, is that it starts by having IP roaming enabled, SIP roaming enabled. because real-time text operates on top of SIP. Okay? So with roaming partners, you will have an agreement that interconnects your IMS core with theirs, and you'll be able to transfer calls between them, or you may be able to take a call from their radio net directly into yours. So it all starts by having interoperability with your IP network, and then SIP goes on top of it, and then on top of that runs the real-time text. So I would posit to say it works very well.
And as it relates to 911, it even to a degree works even better, because with 911, the call is handled by the serving network. And so it doesn't even have to go back completely through the home. There's some places that still do, but it can be handled completely by the local network. And so getting that piece of it, if that serving network is IP enabled all the way to the SINet is IP enabled all the way to the PSAP. The PSAP's enabled and all the elements supported, as I've talked about a bunch of times. I'll keep saying again through here. Then it will allow it to work. And so all the elements, again, location, all the pieces work well with it. If we think about non-service initialized phones, that's starting to make my head hurt a little bit around it. But
And I don't believe NSI phones were part of the real-time text order because of that.
Okay.
Because the concern there was more of a security concern, that if you had an NSI phone that could do SIP and RTT on top of that, well, then I could take a phone that has no service and I could do SIP or IP networking, and I could do all kinds of other things on top of it and not be known who I was because I wasn't provisioned. So there were some security concerns about non-service initialized devices, and that's why it is not part of the RTT order. Sorry, I have a cybersecurity hat. Perfect.
So I just want to clarify one thing that John said to make sure everyone's aware. In a roaming environment, your session is processed by your originating carrier, and that's what makes roaming text to 911 difficult. I've got service in New Jersey, I'm in California. My text gets processed by New Jersey. They don't necessarily know that I'm in California.
yeah, and in RTT, it's not that way, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Can I add to that? Specifically for the legacy network requirement, one of the implementations that we've done is when an RTT call is made into a PSAP 911, we actually auto-answer callback expectation. If they do a callback, we will auto-answer it as a TTY call. Because right now, all the PSAPs are TTY. So we actually have the phone go into an auto-answer capability for a certain time or component, anticipating the possibility of a callback. And that's unique for a 911 call. And that's specifically because it would be a mess otherwise to try and figure it out on the fly.
Sure.
Great, thank you. Now, we also talked about multi-conferencing capabilities briefly a little bit earlier. What is the status of PSAP multi-party teleconference capabilities? Is it feasible? Is it permissible? Maybe Mark?
So we brought this up years ago in the Emergency Access Advisory Committee, the three-party conference concept. So if a PSAP is next-gen capable on an EZNet, it's a fairly simple process to create that conference. Legacy, they've got challenges.
I'd like to add a remark to that as well. This is Christian Vogler. Multi-party RTT requires some support from the bridge, because the bridge has to determine the origination of all these different points of connection and identify them as being distinct from one another. The bridge is also going to then determine when to send which RTT stream. some partners of ours have already done some demos and proof of concept of this, how it can work in practice and what it looks like. There's some more testing. I think some was done in 2012 at the NINA ICE 5 conference event. So the technology is certainly feasible, but it requires some more thought.
I'll agree with that. And also, we're dealing with consumer technology or commercial technology that exists outside of the 911 environment today. And we operationally need to make sure they work well in a PSAP. But it's an operational question, not a technology question, I believe.
Okay. Great. I have several more questions. Time is somewhat short. For Ian Dillner and for Linda Vanderloop, this next question. During the RTT demonstration, you showed sending a message in another language. Will the RTT app affect a translation between one language to another, say English to Spanish, for example? And if you've got one user who is typing into the real-time text app in Japanese, could that be translated into English?
At this time?
Go ahead, please.
At this time, no. We don't have that capability. I mean, there may be some apps that I don't know if could work along with it, but at this time, no, that doesn't happen. And in fact, I've tried the actual talk-to-text when I had the Spanish keyboard, and it actually comes out as, I think I know enough Spanish where I know this is really gibberish and not Spanish.
And I'd agree with what Linda said. No, that capability is not available right now. The point of the demonstration was to show that two users who speak in a different language other than English can use the RTT to RTT to communicate directly. But the translation from one language to another is a very different technology.
It does bring up an interesting thought. That was a challenge as we look back to text to 911, where we looked at multi-languages. And what it brings in is a lot of people we've looked at, how do you do conversion of language, particularly if it may even just simply be Spanish, and how do you deal with that, and how do you do it? So we've looked at the state of the art of language translators are not what I'd call, which should not be considered acceptable for PSAP uses today. They haven't been that good. And what we've really looked at of the way to do it is you do it very similar to we did voice calls. You bring in some type of a language line. Well, in a session, that kind of means it comes up the whole idea of a three-way conference. And so that brings again in here a three-way conference that may be involved with different aspects of it. And it's another level of complexity how it comes in. But in many cases, because again, RTT rides along with voice, a lot of the ways that we would look at doing it may be similar to how we do it using somewhat of a language line. Well, that means that service needs to support that. It's another element that needs to support RTT and how that may be dealt with.
So I'm going to have to say, again, using commercially available technology and things like Google Translate, we've been effectively able to bring text messages in and do language conversion. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. But someone screaming, "Help, I've been in a car accident and I'm injured," there's enough of that translated to where you could start the immediate response by the PSAPs. Because it takes a little bit to get language line on. Now, do you want to do that? Absolutely, because you do need accurate literal translation. But there is technology available today, standard Google Translate technology, that will get you down that path. So I have to think that translation services in a paid environment have to be right around the corner.
Okay, great. We've got several more questions. Question from the audience. Are PSAPs verifying that their TTYs are still in working order and not on a direct connect, particularly if they rarely receive those types of calls. The concern then is that maybe they had a copper line and then their line was copper retired, as it is called. If that line is now transitioned to fiber, it may no longer be compatible and may then prevent RTT connections. Can anyone speak to that?
From my experience with the PSAPs in Texas, and that's what I could speak to, those TTYs are tested regularly, and some PSAPs may test more than others, but there is some regular schedule, because in trying to verify that we're not receiving TTY, they had to filter out all the test calls, and some of them were quite a number of test calls.
And this is Ian at Verizon. I'd just like to add that the use of copper technology isn't a prerequisite for TTY, that TTY technology can be carried over multiple different media. So copper retirement is sort of a very separate issue as opposed to just, and as Richard said, the TTY capabilities are tested on a regular basis with PSAPs.
Christian? Yeah, I'd like to add one more point from a consumer's point of view. As a deaf person, now that RTT has become available, I know the next time that I have to call to contact 911, if I'm on my wireless device, I will be using RTT. I have no way to predict when that will happen, but I would expect that as deployment progresses, it becomes more widely available, it becomes more widely known that PSAPs will start to see that slow increase. Says Richard, I certainly hope you don't have to use it, Christian.
And if you learn how to predict it, let me know, because I'll invest in that.
All right. Let me see. I have another question here. The video was freezing, but I'm not sure if the question was asked about, is it mandatory that PSAPs be ready to accept text messages?
No. PSAPs have the ability to request turn up of text to 911, but it's not a mandatory requirement. As a matter of fact, I believe it was a voluntary requirement on the carriers initially, but it has been, I think it's been codified, right? Yeah.
Bounce back is required.
Okay, I have the last question from the audience here, all the way from California, where I was born and raised. I have some friends over there too, in Sacramento, the governor's office of emergency services. So, this question then is, if California requested RTT statewide for all 450 PSAPs located in that state, what is the level of effort by the covered entities in order to make that happen? Is there a different implementation effort as comparing wireless, VoIP, and ILCs, or excuse me, ILEX, and the CLEX? And for VoIP at the state level, there is no complete VoIP coverage list anywhere that exists. So could a blanket letter cover each of these VPCs, make it possible for them to pass on any VoIP service providers RTT 911 calls so that they could route those calls? That is the question.
So a bit of that. The majority of the effort, I mean, the effort is large because the majority of the effort will be bringing the entire ESI net and the entire PSAP world and the carrier world to IP transport. So assuming that the entire ESI net is doing IP end-to-end transport, and it does it there, the adding on of RTT is a much smaller effort than that initial effort is. The biggest effort is getting it to the full I3 and end-to-end to all the pieces of it, is what I would view it to be. Linda?
So this is Linda, AT&T. Our requirement is very simple. As the PSAP has to be ready for real-time text with IP and all the infrastructure. Once the request is made, we have 6 months to provide it. We would hope assuming all the PSAPs in California were ready, that you would work with us on a schedule if it was going to be statewide, because I'm also born and raised in California, and I know it's a very big state with a lot of PSAPs. But our requirement is very simple. We have 6 months from the time the request is made.
And this is Ian at Verizon. I would add that right now the real-time text capability has been deployed on a wireless phone company basis, and this is still pretty new too. So really only the 3 wireless carriers at this table and a few others have started deploying real-time text. It's not deployed by wireline carriers or wireline competitive local exchange carriers, or to my knowledge, over-the-top VoIP carriers. So, so the question kind of was much broader about all communication service providers, and right now it's fairly limited to mobile service providers.
For the future, currently the FCC has a PSAP readiness checklist for SMS where you don't have to notify all the individual carriers once you've implemented with the major carriers, and perhaps in the future, if RTT becomes more common with other carriers, there could be some type of similar process, similar to the current PSAP readiness checklist that the FCC has, perhaps.
Okay, great. And I think that it's time for us to wrap up. I want to once again thank you all on the panel for being here today to address all of those questions that were posed. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Patkin one more time. Thank you all. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and for your answers. I wanted to take this time to acknowledge all of the hard work by our partners ensuring that 911 communications are keeping up with technology to ensure access for everyone. Those partners include NASNA, NENA, APCO, and the NG 911 Institute. To wrap up this event, please welcome Susie Rosen-Singleton. She is the Chief of the Disability Rights Office in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. Good afternoon, everyone. It is quite an honor to be able to give the closing remarks for this historic event. You have shared your ideas, your predictions, your concerns, and your challenges, and we will take all of those into consideration to ensure that as we move forward, we'll work closely with Public Safety Answering Points to ensure that we have accessible communications for everyone. Before I close and share some of my own thoughts, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the hard work that has made this event possible. Deborah Patkin, of course, who has coordinated the event in its entirety. Thank you so much. All of our sage words from our presenters, our panelists today. I want to thank our interpreting team, our captioning team, and the many, many volunteers from both the Disability Rights Office and the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureaus. Really could not have done this without you all. Thank you so much. Simply put, we have heard today how real-time text can make the difference between life and death. And we've heard that from a number of different people. I also think that it's significant consideration for us in thinking about how we move forward with the deployment and adoption of real-time text by PSAPs. If you think about it, in the 1970s, I don't know if anyone can recall what kind of computer you owned back then. Imagine that you still had that computer to use today. That really is what we're talking about, moving away from TTYs to the modern era technology. We also only have to think back relatively recently to 2007, not even the 70s, but 2007, April of 2007, shooting rampage in Virginia with 33 people dead and staff and students frantically trying to reach 911 through text. And they unfortunately were not able to do so. At the time, that was true for almost any PSAP in the United States. They didn't have text capability at that time. We are still on the road to that transition. And as David mentioned earlier, text to 911 is really a technology neutral text that we refer to. We've seen some other tragedies that have occurred because we did not have text to 911 or an existing capability to text to 911. Fast forward only to September of 2016, years later, we've heard from the group here that we've got 5,783 PSAPs. We've got 240 million calls being made to 911 through wireless phones alone. And I believe it's 25 or 30% of PSAPs that are text capable today. And we hear stories more and more often about how texting actually helps save lives. Last month in the news, there was a story about the city of Mesa in Maricopa County, state of Arizona, where they had just implemented texting for their PSAPs. And they were able to handle, 30 to 50 calls simply with texting, and were able to save lives for those callers. People who are experiencing domestic violence, suicidal callers, and victims of prowlers. So it's not something that's just for people with disabilities. It's for people without disabilities as well. And some of you know, if you've got kids or you yourself find that you actually text much more than you're using your voice functionality on your phone. I've got 3 hearing kids, and I can say I rarely see them ever put the phone to their ear. It's something for our future generations as well. As we move into an NG 911 environment, I also ask that you take a moment to turn on RTT on your phones. Become familiar with the RTT functionality individually, and you'll see how easy it is to use. We here at the Commission will stand ready to be of assistance, to provide resources. We have web pages with information. We can certainly provide documentation. We have a fact sheet in the room. We've got information online to help expedite your process of adopting RTT. Without further ado, I would like to thank you one last time for being here today and wish everyone safe travels back home, and please do keep in touch. Thank you.